So we kick off today with apologies. I'm not aware of any. Jennifer, do you have any?
Lord Mayor, I have received apologies from Councillor Upton, and a couple of councillors will have to leave early tonight. I think Councillor Pressel and Councillor Tidball.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Craig, I understand you have.
Yes, Lord Mayor, I have a declaration of interest on motion A, which is acting on the climate emergency. I've consulted with Anita Bradley and I've been given a form of words to read out, which I will do. In January 2019, the company I work for under contract, Anthesis, and who have a small, within which I have a small shareholding, less than 5%, have won a small amount of work supporting the City Council with its climate change strategy. I've taken no part in that bid process or in any of the commissioned work, nor will I do. I've taken advice from the monitoring officer about this and have been advised that I will still be able to vote, second and speak on the motion. Thank you.
Okay. Any other declarations of interest? I'm not seeing any. Okay. Move on to item 3, minutes. That's in pages 19 to 32 of the main agenda. We'll take 28th of January first. These are for corrections and approval. Unless there is anyone wishing to correct anything, can I assume those are approved? Aye. Lovely. And although it may be 12th of February, it is actually the 13th of February is the correct date. Any corrections? If not, can I see approval? Excellent. And then we move on to item 4, which is appointment to committees. I've not had any notified, and unless the leader wishes to make any changes to that, then that's fine. We move on to item 5, announcements. Kick off with myself, Lord Mayor. I attended the signing of our twinning agreement with Padova, which was a very good experience. It's a wonderful city. I would encourage people to go there and enjoy their hospitality. I've also been to Oxford Week in Bonn, which was very much fun. I understand something like 120 people went from Oxford to enjoy various events, poetry, football, cruises down the Rhine, wonderful time and some good work done on intergenerational living. Some ideas around that, which are happening in Bonn. Slightly earlier than all of that was my charity dinner, and I'm pleased to say we raised over £2,000 for Nightline and Clarence. I haven't got the final figures yet, but it's over £2,000, so very pleasing for that. And just to say, as this is likely to be, and I hope will be, my last significant outing as Lord Mayor chairing this meeting, there are drinks in the parlour afterwards, but only if you behave yourselves. Sheriff, do you have any announcements?
No.
Leader?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Two announcements. Through the course of this year, we've been gradually adding to our list of champions for various areas of life which are not necessarily covered very directly by the City Executive Board. And I have 2 more announcements of champions to fit into those roles. The first one is Councillor Chloe McConaughey, who will become our new small business champion, following in the footsteps of Councillor James Fry, who took on that role in the past. And I'm very delighted that Chloe is going to bring his expertise to that role, and we can supply more information on that one. The second one is Councillor Ray Humstone, who has kindly agreed to take on the role of Armed Forces and Veterans Champion. and work with members of the armed forces in our city. As we know, we've got long-standing relationships in the city with the armed forces, and as indeed has the whole of Oxfordshire. And we also have a number of issues with veterans, and our role will be to make sure that their particular needs are understood well by this council, and Councillor Ravenstone will be taking on that role.
Thank you very much. And move on to the Chief Executive. Thank you. The Monitoring Officer.
Nothing, Lord Mayor.
And the Chief Finance Officer.
Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Move on to item 6, public addresses. As there are none relevant to items of business on the agenda, we move straight on to item 7, which is page 41 in the main agenda. Summertown and St Margaret's Neighbourhood Plan. Councillor Hollingsworth.
I shall be very brief. This neighbourhood plan is the culmination of an enormous amount of work, mostly by the Summertown and St Margaret's Neighbourhood Forum and all the many individuals involved with that group, and I would like to pay my thanks to them for that work. This will be the second neighbourhood plan in Oxford. There are others in the pipeline. The Executive Board therefore recommends to Council that the plan be made, at which point it will properly become part of our planning policies and part of our local plan.
Thank you. Any questions to Councillor Hollingsworth or comments? Andrew.
Just very briefly, if I may, just to echo what Alex has said, this has been a culmination of a huge amount of work, and I'd also, on behalf of my fellow councillors for the area, like to thank everyone who's been involved, the members of the forum and the 3 chairs who've led it, Martin Roberts, Sam Clark and Eric Shillis-Ronald. Nice to have Hank Van Ness, a distinguished member of the forum, with us today. And also, if I may, to thank officers for their tremendous support, and in particular Tom Morris, who's done a wonderful job in supporting us through this rather arcane but extremely interesting and useful process. So my thanks to everyone involved.
Unless there are any further questions or comments, we need to vote on this and accept it, that this plan be made. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. I think that's looking relatively unanimous. Thank you. Anyone against, just in case? No? Right, lovely. We now move on to agenda item 8, page 145. Councillor Linda Smith.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I wish I didn't need to move this report. Firstly, because I wish the number of people sleeping rough in Oxford hadn't increased by 510% in 5 years. Secondly, because I wish the government would promptly step in to help clear up the catastrophic situation we've got on our streets, caused by their ideological commitment to austerity and the ensuing cuts to public services that we're seeing. However, despite the Floyd's Road project being originally conceived in response to a government call for projects to receive funding, we have yet to receive positive news from them about our application to the Rapid Rehousing Pathway Fund. So I am asking Council tonight to agree to the further allocation of £274,000 from homelessness reserves to guarantee funding for this project, so we can get going and ensure the facility opens this winter. And time is tight, but already since this report was published, progress has been made. The architects have completed the stage 2 work, which means they've done the really important work of consulting with people with lived experience of street homelessness. And contrary to reports in the Oxford Mail, it's nice of them to cover it, but it's slightly inaccurate. That wasn't just about choosing the colour of the walls and the interior decor. It's really important work to listen to people, to really understand what barriers exist to stop people taking up the services we currently provide and stop people taking up emergency accommodation when they feel suffered. The design concept has been produced by a local architectural cooperative, Transition by Design, and that's been signed off. And meetings have taken place with St Mungo's to discuss modifying their current contract with the council, where they provide our outreach services, to cover staffing this new facility. The next stage is for the architects to draw up detailed technical plans and for a tender to be awarded for the building works. The existing sum of £184,000 in the capital budget for the scheme would have been enough to open up the night shelter element of the scheme and provide the basic continuous winter provision and expanded sweat provision which this council has promised to deliver. But Floyd's Row has greater potential than that, and tackling street homelessness and making progress on our goal of no one having to sleep rough in the streets of our city is a priority for this administration. So that's why I'm asking for agreement for this further allocation of funds to deliver not just the emergency winter beds, but also an engagement and assessment centre and move-on beds where clients can be accommodated while they are given intensive support from multiple agencies working together to find a long-term solution to their homelessness. This would mean Floyd's Row is fully refurbished and able to accommodate up to 60 people at a time. This more expensive option also has the advantage of providing best value for money as it brings in housing benefit income and so it's broadly cost neutral in terms of the long term. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Craig and then Liz.
Yeah, thank you very much for bringing this forward, Linda. I think anything other than option C wouldn't have delivered as to what this city needs. And I think the figures are quite stark. You know, we have almost 100 people on the streets each night and 5 times the national average. It's a national crisis, but we have a particularly bad problem in Oxford, a tragedy, a crisis in Oxford on our streets. I have a couple of questions. One of them is about how confident are you that option 3 can be delivered for this winter? Because we haven't got a great track record of capital projects, and as you say, time is now short. So I'm wondering whether, you know, perhaps whether the options are going to be phased or whether it's going to be option 3 is going to be available this winter. And the second question is about the financing. You say in the introduction that there seems to be a slight contradiction, maybe I'm reading it wrongly, that in the introduction you're saying that you will be sort of respecting decisions of the No Local Connection group by providing services, at least winter accommodation, to people without recourse to public funds and with no local connection. And yet the funding seems to be coming from the housing benefit. So I'm just wondering how those sums work out if we're providing services to people who can't get housing benefit. Thank you.
So it is a very tight time scale, as I said, and you know, officers have really pulled out the stops, and their work so far has been really impressive, you know, to make the progress that we have made. It will be challenging, but what we have said is that we will prioritise the night shelter element of the scheme, the continuous winter provision. That's our priority, and we will get that up and running this winter. On no local connection, so really the idea, there's 3 wings of Floyd's Row. So the idea is that one will be used in a night shelter style, you know, emergency accommodation. The other will be short-term accommodation for people engaging with services. They might be there a few nights while they're given that intensive support and hopefully move on to something more long-term and more sustainable. And then the third element is where people might expect to be for a longer period of time, and that section will only be available to people with recourse to public funds. The other 2 elements will be open to people without recourse to public funds and without local connection.
Okay. Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We in the opposition welcome this move. Floyd's Road is going to provide a step change in the provision for the homeless, and particularly for our sleepers. And that must be a huge improvement for everybody in this city. But I do have a comment and a question about why councillors were not told it was happening until it was effectively up and running. I've looked back at the Housing Scrutiny panel minutes. On 13th November there was a full SWEP report, but no mention of Floyd's Row was made at that time. On 18th December the budget consultation report came before CEB, but again no mention, just a figure of 200,000 provision towards homelessness and 4.5 for leisure activities for the homeless. There was no mention in the budget itself. We proposed in our amendments to the budget that £1 million should be put aside for the purchase of properties for the homeless, that would have been a point where people could have told us what's happening with Floyd's Road, but nobody thought it appropriate to do so. Then on the 4th of March, there was the first brief mention at Housing Scrutiny that plans are being developed for the future provision of winter-long emergency accommodation, including as part of the proposed development of Floyd's Road. Then, finally, on 8th April, there was a report requesting project approval from the Housing Panel for the Floyd's Road budget, when we were informed that the original limited scheme had been doubled in extent and in cost, from 184 to 458,000. At this point, it was very obvious that the scheme was far advanced. It is a great scheme, but we should have known about it earlier. There should have been transparency in the way that it was conducted, and we are concerned that this shouldn't be repeated with other developments that the council decide that they're going to commence and actually take to a fairly advanced stage before it comes before council. Thank you.
Linda.
So, as I said, originally the project was conceived as a response to a call for government funding. So the government sort of made this funding available in a stupidly short timescale was available for bids to be submitted. So officers had to work really, really fast. And again, things are moving really fast, and I make no apologies for that because we really want to get it up and running for this winter. So I'm sorry if you don't feel you've been consulted. I know that the Housing Panel, did have an extensive presentation from officers on it, and I'll do my best to make sure that all members are informed as we go forward over the next 6 months.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Mike.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's a question of Linda, I guess, if I may. Is Section 3 at Floyd's Road going to be succeeded? Has the city any plans that it should be succeeded with other sites so that people can learn to live independently with all the help that they need, but away from Floyd's Road altogether? In other words, are there any schemes underway that will enable them to go on to the next phase, perhaps, of living independently in their own accommodation?
Linda.
Next year we plan to fund 219 beds, various different styles. Some are hostel accommodation, some are supported living, yes, where people will live in the kind of environment you're describing.
Ed and then Shyster.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. 3 things, if I may. First of all, I didn't want this item to pass by without saying my thanks, which I think is widely put on the table, to Linda for all of her work on this and putting it together. Been a lot of internal persuasion that's gone on, been a lot of hard thinking, a huge amount of discussion with council officers, but also other organisations and those affected in the front line. I think it's been fantastic, really, to have got it to this point, and we owe Linda a lot. Second thing I want to say is just on some of Linda's reflections about the causes of this. There was a really good report which people may well have seen, which Homeless Link, I think, commissioned about a week or so ago, which showed the drastic scale in reductions by local authorities in expenditure on homelessness since 2010 or thereabouts. And that report had some also really good recommendations for government, one of which is if you want to set challenging targets on any rough sleeping, you need to resource local authorities to do it properly. And then the second one as well is don't do dribs and drabs of one-off funding when you need ongoing support for services. And I think it's really important that government takes that message on board. And I hope we get to that place over certainly the next few years. In order that we can fund this project sustainably as well until such time as it is no longer needed. And the third thing is as well, I think it perhaps partly relates to Mike's question. For me, one of the big policy mistakes of government in recent years has been unlinking housing benefits from the real costs of rents. And unfortunately, until you accept that there will be people that need state support for their housing costs, and particularly in the crazy housing market in which we live in this country, particularly in places like Oxford, you're always going to have people with a shortfall, and that's going to make it very, very difficult, particularly for vulnerable groups, to access the accommodation that they need. So we can't claim this as a panacea. It does require some really tough decisions and some significant spending at the national level. I really hope that comes about.
Okay, I'm assuming you don't need to come back on that yet, Linda. Shyster?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Ed said and say congratulations to Councillor Linda Smith for moving this forward. I think one of the most important aspects of this development is that the lived experiences of the people experiencing this humanitarian crisis on the streets of our city are incorporated into this project, and their agency is retained and they're actually part of the process when it comes to designing this space. And that, as Ed has said, and others have said, has come about because of lots of discussions, but also because Councillor Linda Smith has listened and taken this on board. And just to echo again, homelessness and rough sleeping is a political crisis. It's a crisis made in Westminster and it's rippling across the UK. And the only way to resolve this crisis is through a political solution, which obviously means money is needed. And we must be really, really aware of the fact that these austerity measures have devastated many people's lives and continue to do so. And we need to all make sure that this project stays on track and it happens. And most importantly, long term, people should not be living in this way in shelters. They should have houses. And in one of the richest cities in the country, there's no excuse for it. So I hope we can collectively work together to really move this forward. But thank you, Linda Smith.
Okay, unless there are any other comments, and unless Linda wishes to say anything in reply, we need to approve the 4 recommendations on page 145. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. I think that looks pretty unanimous. Any against? No. Good. Thank you. Okay. Carried. Lovely. We now move on to agenda item 9 on page 159, the corporate plan update. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I move this report, and in so doing, I'd like to in particular draw members' attention to the key challenges and key achievements set out on page 161. Because I think it is quite important to remember the context in which we are looking at our corporate objectives and how we've done against them. The impact of Brexit, which is the first thing that is mentioned in this report, is still an unknown quantity, but we can see its impact every day in our city and in our country. And it has occupied a vast amount of time for businesses, for individuals and for organisations such as ours who are trying to deal with the huge uncertainty at government level. So I wouldn't want people to think that just because we haven't heard quite so much about it recently, that unfortunately it's gone away, because it clearly hasn't, and the impact is already being felt. Secondly, in terms of the challenges that we're facing, I wanted to particularly pick up on the second to last challenge on that page, which is the issue of our reducing national, the reducing amounts of money to nil from central government, because that is a massive, has massive implications for us as a council. And it is only thanks to the way in which we have chosen to manage our budgets and deliver efficiency savings and raise income through a variety of different means that we have been able to deliver the kind of budgets and the kind of performances that we wish to do so as a council. And I think this is no small achievement, and puts, thanks to the policy decisions that have been made in this council over a period of many years under mainly Labour administrations. We have done things like kept our services in-house, which has stood us in extremely good stead in these very difficult times. Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that I was drawing people's attention to those challenges, and there are other challenges there too, but I think those are 2 big ones that I wanted to particularly pull out. But there are also some really key achievements that we've managed in spite of all of those very difficult issues. So we have made our efficiency savings, which were not easy. We've delivered more than 90 affordable homes with 30 social rented units built in Barton Park through the council's housing company, part of our solution to our financial issues, and as well as part of solving our housing problems. And we've invested an additional £5 million to buy affordable homes through the National Homeless Property Fund. And all of these key achievements are because of policy decisions that we've made and that we have been measuring through our corporate plan. The final thing I want to say on the corporate plan is we are now entering the last year of this corporate plan, and we'll soon be talking about next year's corporate plan, the next few years of corporate plan, and so more information will be being shared with members on how to participate in building that up and having your say as we go forward.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Dick.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think Susan may have stolen a little bit of her closing comments there about the need for further work. Member of the Audit and Governance Committee, I'm very aware that we actually have no plan to audit our performance on carbon emission reductions. And although I'm pleased to see that some of the climate emergency stuff has crept into this corporate plan here, it's actually very tame. It doesn't actually set any objectives for us. It talks about us trying a bit harder, working with partners. The only actual objective that's in there at the moment is the existing 5% a year reductions, which actually won't take us very far. 5% annual decrease will reduce emissions by 40% overall by 2030. And 80% by 2050. That's nowhere near enough to meet the climate emergency. If we were to actually reach carbon neutrality, for instance, by 2030, we would need 35% annual reductions year on year. So, we've got to think hard about that, and we need some measures in there, I think, which enable us to audit our performance thoroughly. So I think I'd like an assurance that, when we revisit this, we're going to do some serious work. I understand that we've only had a couple of months to do work since the climate emergency motion was passed, but I'd like some assurance on that.
Susan?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, just to sort of reiterate the points I was trying to make at the end, is that this corporate plan has been sort of set and inherited, and we are where we are with the measures that are in that plan. But I would be very surprised indeed if this council didn't want some kind of measures in any future corporate plan which would look at how we measure our progress against achieving some kind of massive reduction in carbon in view of the decisions that we've taken at councils recently. So I think that is absolutely something that we want to be looking at. But as you will also be clear from your position on audit and governance, we would want it to be auditable, measurable and deliverable. So I think that those are the three challenges that we have to find ourselves measures which do actually meet those particular criteria.
Craig?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And I think you're absolutely right to praise sort of past councils for their decisions. And a little bit disingenuous, I think it was cross-party. And even under the sort of new Labour government, we were all fighting to stop privatisation services and council housing and retain services in-house, which has given us lots of advantages over time, and we're reaping those benefits now. Just one point which I do keep raising each time the corporate plan gets rewritten, and it's the second or third time I've mentioned it, is on a clean green Oxford. It says, we have successfully reduced city council emissions by 5%. It is misleading. We haven't reduced them by 5%. It's not that we've gone from 100 tonnes to 95 tonnes, 5% reduction. We've actually made a 5% saving against, if you like, carbon intensity against what it would have been otherwise had we not intervened. So I do think that it's misleading. Anyone reading that would quite rightly assume that we've made a 5% absolute reduction, and we haven't. So, and it's right that we have met our target because we framed the target that way. I just think it needs to be written more clearly.
Okay, Susan, unless you have anything to add. Any further questions or comments? This report is for noting. I assume council are willing to so do. And on that basis, we will move on to agenda item 10, page 175 in the main agenda. Shyster.
So I'd like to move the report and thank the officers and members for their contributions to this piece of work, and I'm happy to take questions.
Craig.
Yes, thank you. And I have sort of spoken to Shyster in advance about this question. So it's on the proposed assessment criteria around the one around seriousness. I was wanting reassurance that, you know, member-to-member complaints won't be sort of taken less seriously than, you know, member-to-officer or officer-public. Because I think, you know, councillors deserve the same level of protection as officers, and, you know, bullying between members is just as unacceptable as bullying between, you know, members and officers, and I just wanted to seek that reassurance.
Thank you, Craig, for raising that. Absolutely, issues involving councillors, amongst councillors, obviously needs to be taken seriously, and that's what we're recommending here. Furthermore, very much, you know, the culture of an organisation is set by, you know, how tolerant or intolerant an organisation is willing to be when it comes to these types of internal disputes. So I would say 100% that this will be taken very seriously. The point being raised here is about issues. You know, bullying is a very serious issue. It's not a minor issue, regardless of if it's been done by members or non-members. The issue here is more about trying to weed out, for want of a better word, trivial complaints which have been dealt with, where there's been an apology that's been issued, and both parties have agreed that that's acceptable, and then further down the line, some point later, it resurfaces. So it's actually about that. But I'd like to thank you for your question, because it's very important to reiterate that absolutely those issues amongst members as well have to be, will be dealt with the rest. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? In which case we need to approve the two recommendations on page 175. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. And any against? I think that's everyone supporting. So that is so approved. Move on to item 11. Questions on the City Executive Board minutes on page 203 onwards. Let's do the 22nd of January first. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I have a comment on a matter which is referred to in the paragraph 125 and 126 on page 204 of the main agenda. It's to do with the Regulation 18 Part 1 consultation on the JSSP, which is also referred to in paragraph 126, that's the Oxfordshire Plan 2050, because the name has changed, but it's the same thing. Members of Scrutiny Committee of this council will remember looking at that document and being told that because it was going for approval to all the district councils in Oxfordshire, that the opportunity for recommending changes to the text was very limited, essentially it didn't exist, which is perfectly logical, and we accepted that. There is some reference made to that in the Scrutiny Committee report in paragraph 125, and Council will note that the text was approved to go out for consultation under bullet point 3 of paragraph 126. However, when the text did go out for consultation, there were a number of changes which had been made apparently after councils had in fact agreed the text. Now, while they are relatively small in terms of actual numbers of words and so on, there are some which seem to me to go beyond minor textual changes which are always delegated. For example, paragraph 35, as approved, began with this sentence: "We are keen to explore these issues with you so that together we can decide where the appropriate balances may lie." The text that went out read, "We are keen to explore these issues so that we can decide where the appropriate balances may lie," which means something different. I wonder whether the leader has any comment on that change and a range of others.
I think it would be me. That's an interesting change, I agree, it does mean something different. I hadn't done a textual analysis of the document and have not observed those words. My understanding from the officers who don't work to us, but are obviously this is a third party in effect, was that the changes were minor in textual form and after consultation with the planning barrister. I imagine the commas and spelling mistakes are minor textual, and that one was probably to reflect the correct interpretation of the law, because that's what it sounds like to me. But I can't offer anything other than that speculation, which is barely informed.
Okay, Craig?
Yeah, a follow-on question to that. I mean, Scrutiny, as Andrew will remember, anyone on Scrutiny were very critical of that document. And, you know, that's the reason why we wanted to make changes and were told we couldn't. So I'm just, a follow-up question is, you know, and I think there was sympathy amongst CEB for some of the things that Scrutiny was suggesting. I'm just wondering what's happened since that. Have those changes been made as part of the response to the consultation? And has there been any feedback on that?
I'm fairly sure, because I'm fairly sure I saw Councillor Wolf's name, but I may be wrong, as somebody who's responded. I wrote a response, obviously not on behalf of the council, because they didn't ask the council's permission to do it, but on behalf of my group and my party, which I think, well, I'm sure you wouldn't have liked it because it wouldn't have had your name at the top, but I think the general intent might have been something you might have been grudgingly approving of, which is the best I can hope for, obviously. But I think in terms of responses, there's been a substantial number of responses. Clearly a lot of them are from landowners who see this as an opportunity to put forward sites that have been rejected in the current local plans. So that's entirely as you would expect. There's been a range of different responses which cover, I think, some really interesting themes, and I think reinforce the point which has been picked up in the discussions on this document, discussions on the climate emergency that we've already seen, that what we need is to be able to accommodate people, to house people in sufficient numbers to meet the housing need, but to do so in a way that respects our environment. And I think that's a more nuanced view than that which was expressed, I think, probably unsurprisingly quite widely by a number of, how to put this, pressure groups very keen on stopping house building, who took the view that there was no room in Oxfordshire for any more people or any more houses, and that's not a view that I share, and I hope it's one that Councillor down.
Sorry, through you, Chair. I mean, I just wondered whether Council, CB, had made a response, really. Obviously, lots of groups, basically.
No, I was advised that legally, as the City Council is one of the bodies through the Growth Board who is in effect consulting on this document, that it would be odd for the Council to then respond to its own consultation. That was the advice I got. Whether I agree with it or not is neither here nor there.
Okay, any further questions on the Exec Board minutes of the 22nd of January? If not, we will. Craig.
On item 129, I'd just like to sort of welcome which I understand has happened since this, the CEB, which is we've actually renegotiated the loan facility with the Low Carbon Hub, and that's something certainly that was brought up in the budget debate, and I'm very glad and grateful that it's actually been done, because I think it's had huge benefit to the city more broadly.
Okay, I think if we move on to the 12th of February minutes, are there any questions on that on page 209 onwards? If not, the 7th of March, page 215 onwards. Liz.
I've got a query about 154, approval of new Twin Cities budget allocation for twinning projects. We've of course, we've already got 5 twins. We've now got another 3 twins, and we're proposing a budget allocation of only 23,000. I was aware when Padua was being looked at, which was over a year ago, that the city were looking for assistance with secretarial and other assistance as well, from Christchurch, which was one of the colleges chiefly involved with the Padua twinning. I don't know what happened about that, but it was clear that more help was needed with 8 cities to twin with. If we're going to do it properly, every time we go to these cities, they give us the most tremendous welcome, as you've mentioned yourself now, and we want to be able to do the same here, but that needs organisation at quite a high level. And 23,000, if it's not supported by additional money from colleges and so on, is just not going to be enough to enable us to provide the level of welcome that we would want to do. Thank you.
Councillor Clarkson, would you like to respond?
There has been quite a lot of discussion, both with oil and with officers, about how we actually spread ourselves now that we've taken on additional twinning arrangements, and we have looked at the way we're going to structure things, and I think we've come up with something that will work. We're currently recruiting for another twinning officer, and as I say, we're looking at a different way of managing things, and I think what we may do is have more events where we bring all the twin cities together for one big event, to make the most of it and to take a more strategic approach to what we have done in the past.
Okay, any further questions on 7th of March? If not, we'll move on to 13th of March minutes. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. This is a question on paragraph 159 on page 220 of the agenda about the flag flying protocol. The current protocol states that there is a small cross-party group who are consulted when a request is received. Responses are gathered by email, and it's usually fairly quick, and it's usually consensual, but if not, a majority usually emerges. Under this report, CEB has changed that so that the decision is now made as an executive function, which it always was formally, but the leader reassured me that she would indeed continue to consult the position on a cross-party basis. It does seem to me that, you know, a flag flying from the town hall is a very public gesture, sort of thing that ought to be formally done on a cross-party basis. I think that our residents would expect that. I did oppose this change when it was made, and I'd like to hear again what the justification for it is. Also, because the leader has, this is very welcome, undertaken to consult on a cross-party basis, isn't that the same as the agreement that we've already had, and how is it quicker?
I think the main changes in as part of the flag flying protocol were to actually try and establish a full list of all the different occasions on which we would be flying flags from the City Council, from the Town Hall, and to try not to be having endless debates by email or any other forum in order to kind of decide whether this week we were flying a particular flag or another particular flag. And I hope that we now have a fairly complete list. So the main gist is that we should not be having these debates at all because we have got a pretty comprehensive list. I think the main reason for giving the full power of the flag flying to one person was just for expedience, really, and that bearing in mind what I just said, that we have got a very complete list. There might be some occasions on which, at very short notice, we might wish to make a decision about flying a flag. And so what I undertook when agreeing to this change, because I can assure you it's not actually my greatest wish to spend my life deciding which flags fly from town. I would make sure that if there was anything in the slightest bit controversial, that I would always seek the views of the leaders of the opposition, not the leaders of the opposition parties, because I would want it to be a cross-party consensus of something that had any kind of degree of controversy attached to it. But I think if it was something that I could clearly understand there would be cross-party consensus on, then I would use my delegated powers.
I believe we have 3 minutes left on this. Craig and then John.
I was just going to talk about the Scrutiny report, where it talks about social value through procurement, just to sort of try to dissuade Councillor Hollingsworth's views that I'm a grumpy old green and always upset about everything. I notice you're consistently trying to get this across. It's just not true. Anyone who knows me knows I'm very jolly and happy. But this is the social value through recruitment is a really important issue. So I'm really glad that Councillor Turner's welcomed it. It's something I know Councillor Fry and I in Finance Panel have been working for some time to try and get that. And I just hope that, saying that we're going to have 5% of our procurement allocated by social value, and I know Manchester have got 10%, and I know you've expressed a willingness to go further than the 5%, which is great. So I'm just wondering what the process will be now to decide what method we use for determining the social value in procurement contracts, and whether or not you push that back to Finance Panel for support on that, or whether that's something you've got your own thoughts on.
Thanks, Craig. A couple of things. We had a good internal discussion on this a while back, and I think a couple of things we want to do. One is we want to bring back a report down the track, probably in a few months' time, about how this is going. And I think that would probably then be a good moment to talk about changes, extensions, also a bit around reporting around the council as well, and sharing what we've done there. And at the same time, we also wanted to pick up the conversation about sort of local leadership on this, because I think our ambition was not only to focus on some of the council's procurement activities or narrow sense, but also to work with other organisations about getting the best the best for local companies, local organisations, particularly social enterprises, and getting benefits for our communities through procurement, whether it's done by the council or by other public and indeed third sector and even private organisations. So I think probably it would be sensible for us to have a look at this, whether a report would go to Finance Panel or to CEB, or from Finance Panel to CEB, or through Scrutiny. In a way secondary. I think we needed a conversation with us members about it once we've had the chance for it to bed in. Perhaps we can take that offline and talk about the exact process then.
John?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Will the leader accept my congratulations for the decision of the Executive Board not only to put the European Union flag on the top of the Town Hall on May the 9th, on Europe Day, but also on the day that we were supposed, Brexit means Brexit, our dear Prime Minister told us we were going to leave the rest of the European Union. I'm sure both actions have the strong support, not just of all parties in this chamber, but the overwhelming majority of people in this city.
We've finished our 15 minutes, but I propose to extend enough time to allow the leader to respond to that point.
I'm always happy to take John's congratulations.
Thank you. We now move on to agenda item. Yes.
We haven't dealt with the 10th of April, on which I did have a matter to raise.
No, that's because we ran out of time. I think if you can take your questions offline with the relevant CB board member, that would be the way to do it. Okay, we now move on to item 12 on the briefing note. Questions on notice from members. And we kick off with Councillor Wade to Councillor Clarkson on the covered market. Do you have a supplementary? You don't know? No? Okay, Councillor Wade to Councillor Clarkson, covered market visibility. Thank you. Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Clarkson, reinvigorating. Lovely. Councillor Ross Smith to Councillor Clarkson, fees for events in parks. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do, Lord Mayor, if I could ask one. Thank you for your response and things. I'd like to ask a supplementary question and give it a scenario. If a local charity is holding an event using all volunteer time and things, and they're either waiving a charge for other local organisations to be there, or allow the local charities to be there. In fact, they're probably just charging just a nominal amount of about £10. Does she think it's right that then if they're putting in their gazebos and tables and things, they should be then charged £50 on top of that £10 just to get onto the site to unload their things? It does seem a little bit unfair. I have looked at the wording on the actual fees and charges, and it can be waived for those areas that are considered to be in regeneration areas. However, for example, the Headington Festival puts on free entertainment, and we would like to keep it that way rather than charging people too much.
Thank you. The main reason why the charges for vehicles were introduced was because too many people were bringing too many vehicles and it was damaging the parks. And even vehicles there for a charitable event can cause the same amount of damage. Having said that, I think we would want to look very carefully and make sure that where vehicles are there and there's a sensible number of them, that we would look at reducing the charge or waiving them in certain circumstances. I'm happy to go back and talk to officers about that. Thank you.
Councillor Simmons to Councillor Clarkson.
Yes, a supplementary. Thank you very much for your response. Just a further question about sort of wheelchair access and access with buggies. You mentioned there'll be gathering places. Does that mean there will be managed access for those people over Magdalen Bridge? Or how? I can understand your response on cycles because of that, but I'm just wondering about the sort of wheelchair access and families with buggies.
I don't have the answer to hand, but I will talk to officers and I will make sure that you're told and that is communicated for people who do want to take part. Thank you.
Councillor Harris to Councillor Chapman. Do you have a supplementary?
If I can take these two questions together, 10 and 11, I'd just like to ask, was the reason why the procedure of delegating the project to the Canal and River Trust taken because that was the quickest way forward? If not, why was it done that way?
Well, I would say to Councillor Harris, that's the question you should really be addressing to the County Council. It's County Council money that is actually funding this, it's not City Council money. So my answer stands that we were prepared to do the work, but I suspect the reason why, in the end, Direct Services didn't do the work on the canal side and the River Trust went to its own contractors is because it's a very specialist area. And I would expect that actually OBS does not have experience in that area of any great depth. That would be my supposition.
Councillor Goddard to Councillor Chapman. Thank you. Councillor Simmons to Councillor Turner, social value weighting.
No supplementary.
Councillor Simmons to Councillor Turner, social housing receipts.
Yes, just it doesn't seem very much money, given that the value of the flats that they're on the market for. So I don't know if there's any. Was that genuinely 15% of the value? I know there's another question 11 about that.
The amount of money is what it is, and it will be checked by our lawyers, and I'm very happy to ask them to double check it if that would be what the councillor would wish. Yeah, and again, just to repeat what I said to Craig, I appreciate he's struck by the figure. I'm happy to ask officers to check and perhaps come back and explain how the figure was calculated, if that would be useful.
Councillor Wade to Councillor Turner, social housing receipts.
Craig and I are obviously thinking along the same lines quite independently on this one, but 3.9 million seems very low. I suppose my supplementary question is, have all the flats been sold? Have all 59 market value flats? And is 3.9 the final figure we can expect from what must be a huge sale?
Lord Mayor, since I'm not involved in selling or buying any of the flats, I don't know what the state of play is on that. It wasn't part of the planning committee that was deciding on these issues at the time. I'm happy to share the answer on the calculation of the affordable housing receipts if members are interested. Just taking a step back, I would just start with perhaps a brief comment because I think this may risk clouding our assessment of the benefits of the West Gate to Oxford. And I do appreciate the point that's being made here, but at the same time, Certainly from our point of view, we had a horrible car park which would have needed millions of pounds worth of work, probably replacement taken off our hands, being replaced. We now have a secure income stream coming in. We've seen a significant increase in our business rates income. We've seen a significant increase in the number of jobs which are available there. We've seen good social value delivered actually through the process of constructing the shopping centre, and ultimately all of this has done a lot to secure financially the future of our frontline public services in Oxford. So I will come back and I will try to give the Councillor a clear answer on the calculation of the figure we've received, clarification from officers, but I don't wish to cloud our view of the benefits of the Westgate Centre to Oxford and to frontline services in our city.
Thank you. Councillor Wade. Councillor Turner, commercial occupancy rates. Thank you. Councillor Rodsmith, Councillor Turner, project management team.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you for your answer. Could I just ask how many of the posts have been advertised externally? I see that you mentioned that 2 posts have been filled already. Were they filled internally or were they filled externally? And are the 3 posts that are going to be filled through the interim resource going to be advertised at all externally too?
Thanks. Again, I'll come back to the Councillor with detailed answers on that. And I tend to take the view that for posts other than at the most senior levels, the recruitment would normally be down to officers, and members don't actually get involved in worksmith through that. And there are good reasons for that. And I think it would be inappropriate. We do have, as part of the council, policies on when we advertise internally and when we advertise externally. Those policies are subject to discussion with our trade unions, amongst other things. It's part of our commitment to avoiding compulsory redundancies that we make at the budget time. I wouldn't expect us to be departing from our employment policies in respect of these or any other posts. So happy to come back on that. Nonetheless, I'm glad to see the interest, not least because I do recall there was a group on this council, Lord Mayor, that was trying to get rid of these posts altogether. I didn't think they were necessary when it came to the budget rounds.
Thank you. Councillor Wade, Councillor Upton, dockless bike companies.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I do have a supplementary. It's Councillor Upton.
Sorry, Councillor Upton has had to give her apologies. Unfortunately, she's testing out our health services at the moment. But I was going to recommend to the Lord Mayor that he asked Councillor Hollingsworth to respond on any supplementaries on the bike issues, and I will pick up the health one if needed.
Okay, the finger of fate falls on Alex.
It's a numerical question. It looks as though both Mobike and Pony Bikes are operating 750 bikes each, but it's just 750 between them. I'd like to know what the actual number is and whether there's any intention to increase this number, because in August 17, when the Code of Conduct was set up, it was a maximum of 200 bikes for each of the companies. It's now moved up to 500 plus 250. So 750 or maybe even 1,500 for the two bike companies. And this seems a huge amount, but this may not be something that you can answer immediately. I accept that.
Yes, that's entirely correct. You're right. I cannot answer that. I think we need to get a written response to you. I'm not sufficiently going to say the detail of any changes to the policy or indeed how many bikes the 2 companies actually have. So we'll get that to you in writing. I'm looking at those writing minutes. Can we get a response ASAP, please?
Okay, Councillor Wade, Councillor Upton, bike hangers.
This again may not be something that Councillor Hollingsworth is particularly keen to answer, unless he knows about bike hangers. So I won't ask a supplementary question.
No, you've got the floor, go for it. Take a run at it.
Bike hangers cost about £3,000 each. Sheffield stands cost about £30 each, plus the cost of installation. It would seem to me that it would be useful to have a combination of them. We're going to have to sell the concept of the bike hanger to a lot of our residents who will find it a strange thing to find on their streets. But can you confirm on behalf of the council that necessary work's going to be done to encourage people to want to have a bike hanger at the end of their street, and if not, at least to have more Sheffield stands?
Yes, I certainly can. I mean, we clearly have a drastic shortfall in secure cycle parking. I think probably every single person in this room has had either themselves or a family member or somebody has had their bike stolen, vandalised or something. It's clearly a really serious issue. So the more cycle parking that we can get and the more secure it is, the better. So the hangars, we have had discussion about this in planning committees, and we tend to kind of look on vertical cycle parking with rather a frown when it's inside a house. So, you know, I'm open-minded. You know, they're useful for the able-bodied, certainly for the older and frailer cyclists. Hoisting your bike into a vertical position is perhaps not a viable option. But whatever the form of parking, it is absolutely critical that there is more of it, and not just more of it, but a lot more of it. I know Councillor Upton is looking to bring forward proposals for new cycle parking spaces across the city centre. Officers have been working and identified a substantial number of potential sites. We have funding for that because of the budget bid that we put in. But it still needs to be transformative, and that's why things like the Oxford Station proposal has in its master plan not just a few hundred extra parking spaces for bikes, but thousands. That's the kind of scale of change that we need. And on a final comment, I've been a long-standing supporter of the pedestrianisation of Broad Street, and certainly the removal of the parking spaces from it. 28 parking spaces with cars driving round and round them makes no positive contribution to this city and a substantial negative one. Replacing those 28 spaces with some cycle parking and some pedestrian space, which to my view be a significant enhancement.
Councillor Landell-Mills to somebody. New cycleways.
I don't know who's going to deal with this question. It's really whether the B4044 will come back to life. I mean, and which would be a significant improvement to people coming in on that route.
I think that's clearly answered in the question, and of course that is a question directed at the council. I, like the council, would strongly support the provision of that cycle route, but it is outside our boundaries.
I might add that my understanding is that there are proposals being brought forward, or that there are efforts being made to try and find a way to put forward a bid still to do that. And one of the things that Louise's helpful meeting that she engineered with Jessie Norman and was able to take Ian Hudspeth along with her, enabled them both to do was to point out the complete idiocies, frankly, of the fact that the more sustainable part of the development had to be withdrawn from the proposal put forward to government because it didn't make sense in terms of the way that they then calculated their bids. And that seems to me to be an utter failure in the way that the government design their programmes if the sustainable element of the transport actually is unhelpful in terms of then making that bid successful.
Okay, Councillor Ross Smith, London Road Cycleway.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Councillor Upton for her response and actually for her questions as well too. Yes, I am the County Councillor for Headington and Quarry, which includes the London Road, which was rebuilt and had some off-road cycleway put along it at the same time. The location of the bus shelters was taken into account with the safety audit, and the officers did approach... Is this a question? Yes, it is. I'm just coming to it. The officers did approach the City Council with regard to actually changing the location of some of those shelters, but were told by the city officers that they couldn't because they were locked into a contract with Clear Channel. So I would like to ask if, I'm not sure if Councillor Upton will be able to answer this, it might be something that Councillor Upton might be able to, when we have our off meeting with regard to this, if he would agree that actually getting some common sense to provide a better solution for the off-road cycleway on the road is something that we should knock heads together between the two councils and get done.
Alex?
I think the precise details of this clearly ones with which Councillor Smith and Councillor Upton are going to be deeply familiar in a way that I am not. So I think I'll defer from answering the precise point. I do think on the broader point of collaboration and cooperation between the two councils, I do agree. I wouldn't necessarily say that head knocking is always required. Polite conversation also works. I think that a number of projects which have been seized up for far too long, particularly things like the controlled parking zones across Oxford, gentle persuasion, collaboration and close cooperation have achieved more on those fronts in the last 24 months than years of shouting at each other via the pages of the Oxford Mail, fun though that was.
Councillor Wolfe, cycle to work scheme.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a quick supplementary. I'm just curious as to what the usage of our staff e-bike pool is. I get the impression that the bikes, I quite fancy one myself, sitting there gathering dust, I think. Do you know how much they are being used, whether that scheme is working?
I think that is indeed going to be a written response.
Well, I find it annoying going in there and finding them empty racks and all the other racks are full and I haven't got anywhere to park my bike. So my experience of using those spaces is that they are used very well. Councillor Simmons, Councillor Scrutiny.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm very grateful for the response. I don't think we've had a debate about this at Council, but I'm very glad that our representatives on the various sort of health scrutiny and Health and Wellbeing Board are representing the same views I would against the privatisation of services at the Churchill. I'm just wondering whether, because we haven't had a debate, whether it's worth a follow-up letter from the leader or something just to reinforce, now it's with the Secretary of State, to reinforce our position as a council, I'm sure it is shared universally across the party.
I think I'm right in saying that Councillor Upton has written on our behalf, and she certainly made representations to the Scrutiny Committee on our behalf, but I'm happy that either she or I, probably bearing in mind that I work for the trust in question, it might be better if it comes from Councillor Upton as our lead member for health, so I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, Councillor Simmons to Councillor Rowley, HRA borrowing cap.
No supplementary.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Rowley, affordable housing delivery.
No supplementary, Lord Mayor.
And Councillor Henwood to Councillor Rowley, carbon neutral developments.
No supplementary, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Henwood to Councillor Isleworth, local plan carbon neutrality.
No supplementary, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Hollingsworth, local plan zero carbon homes.
Yes, thank you very much for this reply. The big question that it leaves in my mind is whether having a zero carbon requirement on new build would it actually have any negative impact on our housing delivery. Councillor Rowley's reply to my earlier question suggests the primary constraint is actually land availability. Land prices at £4.3 million per hectare in Oxford are clearly a major factor in the cost of housing. The additional cost of the building cost is only about 2% on a property. I think the government is itself considering prohibiting fossil fuel heating in new builds, and the government has lifted our borrowing cap. So I'm curious to know whether there really is any impact on our prospective housing delivery by having a zero carbon build requirement on new properties. I appreciate that retrofitting existing properties is a different matter.
Okay. At the moment, there is an additional cost to achieving zero carbon. So if a developer comes forward with a hypothetical developer with a hypothetical site with 100 units on it, our social housing policy requires that 40 of those units be social housing and another 10 be intermediate of some form. If that site has marginal viability, then it is possible that a requirement for zero carbon for those new build might cause that developer either to not bring the site forward until prices for new build zero carbon fall, which is a possibility. Or it might cause that developer, using our current planning policies, to argue that either some of the social housing or some of the intermediate housing cannot be viably delivered, leaving the council as the planning authority in the challenging position of having to decide which is more important, the zero carbon or the percentage of social housing. Now, those are all hypotheticals. The reason that we put the policy in the way that it is we think that prices, the costs for zero carbon are falling. We think that what we have asked for in the early years of the plan are the highest achievable, which will get past the planning inspector. And that we think the target of achieving zero carbon for new build by 2030 will arrive at a point where viability will cease to be a question as prices for components, design techniques and other things fall. But those are all conjecture to some extent. They're informed conjecture and they're based on evidence. But there is a potential offsetting out there. There is a potential for our zero carbon policies to cause some developers to pause and for housing delivery to be slower. I don't think it will, and that is why we've chosen these policies as opposed to policies which are weaker, which I think will be going too far the other way, undermining our commitment to zero carbon, or too robust, which I think would cause us to either run into problems at the public inquiry and have the entire policy thrown out, which is a risk, or run the risk of slowing up housing delivery. I answered this question in relation to the Oxfordshire 2050 plan. We need to be able to deliver housing, and we need to deliver that housing in a way that is zero carbon. I think if we get ourselves into a position where you're doing one or the other, we're failing.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Gant, Councillor Hollingsworth, Schmar, estimates and housing targets.
Thank you. Can I thank Alex for what must be the longest response to a written question ever seen in this, or probably any other council. Yes. Could you confirm that what is referred to in your response as the Oxford Schmar roll forward of 2018 is based on the report by the consultants GL Hearn, which was titled Oxford City Objectively Obsessed Need Update, and that the consultants say in that final draft of that report, applying this level of uplift, the level they were given, to the starting point figure, results in an OAN of 776 dwellings per annum. We consider that provides a strong basis for planning positively and takes into account demographic trends, economic growth and local affordability issues. Without reading out the whole of your written answer, why has the council not accepted the advice of its own consultant?
Because you're only reading part of that advice, and this is the point which I've said over and over again, which is in here. The basis for the figure is the social housing need, not the OAN, which is a generalised figure. The figure, and it explains this in our local plan. We went through this in huge detail when we brought the local plan to this chamber. And it's not my fault you didn't read it. I know it's complicated, but you know, this is why this is a very long answer, because it reiterates verbatim all the words which were used in reports which have come to this council already. The basis for our local plan submission, the basis on which we are progressing, is the social housing need, and that is the figure from which the housing need is derived.
Councillor Wade, Councillor Hollingsworth, numbers of new homes.
Thank you. This is as a result of the CEB, which was advised that there were two indicators which are not meeting their targets. One of which is the number of new homes granted permission in the city. If there is a problem finding sites for new homes in the city, wouldn't it be sensible and in fact necessary to allocate new sites for housing under the local plan?
Yeah, yes, that's why we've done just that.
Councillor Wade, Councillor Hollingsworth, activity in the Greenbelt. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Wade?
No, I don't have a supplementary.
Thank you. Question 28, Councillor Gotch to Councillor Hollingsworth.
Supplementary, Lord Mayor, if I may. I accept that I don't know the total amount of traffic in Nottingham. I will have to go and check that figure myself. But is Alex aware that the use of public transport as a result of reintroducing buses that were cancelled, as has happened in Oxford, of course, the result of improved public transport in that way, in fact, has increased public transport usage in Nottingham by about a third, and that's a serious increase. I don't know about the overall figures. I will check that later.
It's always interesting to discuss other cities in some detail. I'm not fully aware of the percentages of public transport use increase in Nottingham. The point that I was making in response here was that the workplace parking levy in Nottingham has been very successful in one respect, and that is raising the funds for subsidising the tram service. So the tram service has been introduced, so that is a significant tick. The reason I've answered the question in this way is that it is not a panacea, and if you look at the congestion levels in Nottingham, the traffic levels in Nottingham, they have not fallen. And so I think that when the city and county councils are looking at options for things like workplace parking levy, congestion charging, or what might be called concrete blocks to block roads, you need to look at why you're doing it. And the primary objective to me is to reduce traffic, not to raise money. And I think if you approach things from that basis, you arrive at conclusions about which are the preferred options and which are the most cost-effective options and which are the most effective options in terms of reducing traffic congestion and air pollution than you do if you're wanting to fund things like trams or whatever it might be.
Councillor Henwood to Councillor Hayes, speed awareness.
No supplementary, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Hayes, environmental sustainability team.
I don't have a question, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much for putting all that stuff in one place. It's very helpful. There has been an issue with us not...
Thank you very much in that case. Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Hayes, sustainability strategy. No supplementary. Good. Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Hayes, electric vehicles and transport planning.
No supplementary, thank you.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Hayes, Castle Mill stream voters.
No supplementary, thank you.
And the second question on that.
The same again.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Wade to Councillor Linda Smith, Billico Boatyard Development.
I'm afraid I do have a supplementary. The supplementary is because I know there's a cabinet petition going through and there are 48 conditions attached to it, a lot of which are about improvements for the community. I'm concerned from your written response that you say a number of discussions were held with the community associations about delivering some of the community aspects of the proposal. I'd like to know whether this means that the original application is being seriously watered down.
Councillor Wade, I'm sure you'll understand if I deal with a written response after the meeting.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Linda Smith, Floyd's Row.
No supplementary.
Councillor Simmons to Councillor Brown, open sourcing council data.
No supplementary, thank you for the answer.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Brown, Citizens Assembly on climate emergency.
No supplementary, thank you.
Councillor Gant to Councillor Brown, report from the Growth Board.
Thank you for the response. Obviously, I submitted this question before I'd seen the agenda. I hope that our fellow district councils take as much notice of our recommendation as you have.
Although I might add that report was also coming before your question arrived.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Brown, Oxcam Expressway.
No supplementary, thank you.
Councillor Wade to Councillor Brown, assisting local traders. Councillor Gant to Councillor Brown, position on people's vote.
Yes, I do have a supplementary, which is really in two parts. Just to be clear, we're talking about two different responses here. First of all, Council asked the leader to write to our MPs, which she did. In her reply, Ms Moran then asked the leader to reply outlining or clarifying her own position. The written response appears to imply that the leader has not replied to that. Is that a correct inference? And if you have replied, what was the answer?
Your inference is correct.
Councillor Garden to Councillor Brown, election participation.
Yes, thank you very much for all the work that's been done by the officers and everyone else to inform the EU27. However, we asked for the EU28 at the moment, so I'm just interested in finding out what's being done to support and encourage registration overall for UK or electorate eligible voters, as well as you mentioned work's being done on student unions, colleges and universities, but we obviously have a number of 18-year-olds in schools that can also, and normally there's a low turnout for that age group. Can you just tell me what's being done to inform them?
Well, I mean, I think really it's the same sort of campaign that we always do in terms of an election drive, and we use social media pretty effectively for that. But I would encourage all councillors across the chamber, as I'm sure you all are, to, as you're going out as part of your council duties, but also on your social media accounts, to encourage people to sign up and to make sure that they're on the register, and of course to use their vote when the time comes. But I think it's a responsibility for the council, but it's also a responsibility on all of us as elected members to do everything we can to make sure we get the message out there, and I'm sure that everyone will be doing that.
Councillor Garden to Councillor Brown, election participation by EU national.
Similar questions. I'm still going to link and just go back to the question about registration of schools. I mean, I think it's fine. Kids love social media and things, but is any work being done with the schools or the universities, sort of with the authority, I guess, within those institutions specifically?
Well, I would refer to my previous answer in terms of colleges and universities. In terms of schools, I will check and get a written response as to whether there's any specific action being taken in schools. I'm happy to ensure that letters are sent to schools and encouraging them to do it. I'm also conscious of the fact that we're now in exam season, so the opportunities for schools to actually interact with pupils who might actually be eligible to vote in those elections are now somewhat reduced, unfortunately.
Okay, that concludes member questions. We have to wait until 7 o'clock for the item 13 public addresses, and so I propose that we try and cover items 14 and 15 in the agenda papers, but we'll aim to finish by shortly after 6:30 for tea. So this is on pages 235 and 243 in the main agenda, outside organisation reports. Councillor Brown, would you like to introduce this? Oxfordshire Growth Board Partnership.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is a report which, as I intimated to Councillor Gant earlier, was a planned report. In fact, prior to indeed Scrutiny's suggestions and his question to Council. I have sought to try and make sure that from our perspective at least, in terms of City Council, that we have been bringing back regular updates to the Council from the Growth Board as and when there were particular issues to raise. And following on from meetings, I will continue to do that and to try and make sure that people are fully informed about what is going on in the Growth Board. There's not always a huge amount to report, but this is a sort of something of an annual report back to Council on what's been happening over the course of the year. So there's perhaps a little bit more in this one than there might be after sort of the next meeting, just reporting on one meeting. But I'm really happy to take any questions. I think it's been a sort of interesting year for me and for the Growth Board. It's been our sort of first full year once the deal has been passed. We've made some significant steps in terms of having made first full-time appointment now of a programme director, and I'm sure that a number of people will be familiar with Bev from the County Council, who's taken on that role for both that and indeed the ARC. We've made progress on our targets this year, so we have delivered, for instance, on our housing targets, which is really important and significant. And obviously, you know, as your representative on the ARC, I've also been attending meetings there, or sending along substitutes to do so, and we continue to play our part in keeping an eye on what's going on with that particular body. At the moment, I would say it's still very much finding its feet, and there isn't a lot of progress to report. But I think it is an important place for us to continue to make representations about what we want to see in terms of sustainable growth in the future. And that is the role that I have played on both the Growth Board and in those ARC meetings, making sure that people understand that we want to see growth, economic and housing, but we want to make sure that it is sustainable. And we also want to make sure that it's equitable, and social housing is very much a key part, and affordable housing more generally, of what we wish to see in terms of housing growth across Oxfordshire. Happy to take some questions.
Okay, Andrew and then Craig.
Thanks very much, Lord Mayor. Yes, I mean, I think everybody would agree that we need to see sustainable growth. I think one of the issues with the Growth Board agenda has been around the issues of clarity and accountability and its public-facing role. And that is why I was among those who called for the setting up of the scrutiny function, and very glad that that was done, and indeed to be part of it. Susan has referred to the leaders group across the ARC. I think that is one of these bodies that people know exists but don't know what it does, who's on it, how often it meets, what its arrangements are. At the last meeting of the Growth Board, as she will well know, the board appointed its representative on the Oxford to Cambridge ARC Executive Committee. What is that? I don't know. I was at the meeting. How was Councillor Mills chosen? What will he do? I don't know. These are things which worry people. This is an excellent report, and I'd certainly like to thank Caroline for a typically thorough and informative report, but it does make it very clear that what's going on here is growth, and it's being driven by an economic agenda. People are spooked by that. Councillor Hollingsworth earlier referred to groups in our county who oppose house building under all circumstances. I don't know any groups like that. I'm certainly not party to any groups like that. Councillor Brown is right, sustainability is right, it has been done well, it's been done well in Cambridgeshire. But people want this to be done in a way which is open and which is accountable. And I hope that the leader would agree with me that the Growth Board really, frankly, needs to do better in doing that. I mean, I perhaps won't necessarily ask her to comment on the arrangement about the chairing for the next year, as you may wish to do so. But I think that is an example of where it has simply not behaved in a way which makes it look like a properly accountable body. I mean, would she agree?
Well, you suggested I might not wish to comment. I'm very happy to comment on that issue. I do agree with you. And as you know, I made representations both at the Growth Board about that. I thought that it was entirely wrong. I didn't agree with it, and I do have some real concerns about the way decisions were being made at the Growth Board about the chairing of the Growth Board in the future, and I'll continue to make those representations. In terms of the appointment of Councillor Mills, there was a slightly interesting scenario that Councillor Mills has been appointed to a committee that actually at the moment doesn't exist. So this executive committee of the ARC hasn't actually yet been formed by the ARC. So the Growth Board actually made a commitment that at such time as it was formed, Councillor Mills would be appointed to it, but it has not as yet been actually set up. So we are still at very early stages of the arc. I do share your concerns about how accountable and scrutinisable that body could and should be. And you can take my word for it that I will continue to press for it to be more clear in its doings, but to be honest, at the moment there have not really been any doings of the leaders group of the ARC. I think it's still struggling to find a way, as witness the fact it hasn't yet managed to set up an executive committee to actually formulate itself. And I think that we must make sure that if we are participating in this body, which we are, and I think we need to ensure that we do have a voice in that room, because potentially important decisions will be made there, that we can find a way in which we can describe what is happening there and make sure that it is fully accountable. I think that's a really important part of the democratic process, and to me that will be something that's very important.
Craig?
Yeah, I share many of the concerns that Andrew raised, and thank you, Susan, for giving that reassurance. I just wanted to point out about the consistent use of good growth as a term. And I know there's the county's growth board scrutiny and our own scrutiny committee heavily argued for the use of clean growth as a term, which is defined in the government's clean growth strategy. It has that benefit of being in a government document. And it would address a lot of the concerns being raised around this chamber around the central importance of climate change and concerns around carbon emissions in formulating strategies. So I'm hoping that you are pushing and you see that there's light at the end of the tunnel to stop using this nebulous good growth term and switch to a well understood term that does include consideration of climate change.
I can't remember who it was, but somebody who's once said that if you turn a phrase around and it doesn't make any sense, then it probably doesn't make sense. So, I mean, nobody was promoting bad growth. Yeah. So I think good growth is a fairly nonsense phrase, if you like. We certainly have had discussions at the Growth Board on clean growth, and I think it is a helpful piece of terminology, and not just a piece of terminology, but a philosophy for what we should be looking for. I actually think it reflects largely what the Growth Board is actually trying to achieve. So I think it would be quite helpful if the Growth Board might find itself able to accommodate the terminology of clean growth in future documents and future plans and future discussions, but I will continue to raise it as an issue.
Yeah. Thank you. Unless there are any further questions, we'll move on to the Oxfordshire Children's Trust Board. Marie, would you like to introduce that?
Yeah, sure. So I have had the pleasure of sitting on this board since 2017. For those of you that are unfamiliar with it, the board oversees key areas of multi-agency strategic planning for children and young people across the county, with the objective of improving outcomes for children in relation to being successful, keeping safe, staying healthy and being supported. And I just wanted to flag the priorities both for this year and the forthcoming 2019-2020 are children missing out on education, social and emotional well-being and mental health, and protecting children from domestic abuse. The work that we did through our Oxford City Council Children and Young People Strategy supports some of the work that the board does, and indeed was commended by that board when it was published last year. So I'm very pleased to say and thank all officers again for their hard work on that. I also wanted to just highlight very briefly a piece of work that I think was a real sign of what this board can achieve, and that's around LGBTQ+ issues with young people, and the board has supported training being delivered by Topaz at an anti-bullying youth conference has taken place with a focus on LGBT bullying at school, and something in my role that I've supported on the board is that actually we look as a county at the way school health nurses can support that work going forward. So that's just an example of where the board works very well indeed. I move this report and I'm very happy to take any further questions.
Any questions, Liz?
We welcome the Children and Young Persons Plan 2018 to 21, but we wonder why it's taken so long to come before us. It's dated June 2018. So it's now quite an old report, and it's been in action for nearly a year. We also notice that there's only one small mention on page 10 of the need to increase the number of young carers known and supported in Oxfordshire. Well, there's a charity, which some of you will know, called the Be Free Young Carers Charity, which has pretty good numbers for southern Oxfordshire, Vale of Whitehorse, and now the city, where it's done some research. Perhaps they should be invited to the board of the Children's Trust so that they can give advice as to the numbers around. It appears there are about 2,000 young carers in Oxford alone, in the city. So it's a serious number. Thank you.
So just on the plan was, as I say, a result of the board. That is to be, just to be clear, is separate from our City Children and Young People's strategy. I suppose that this was the best opportunity for that to come through. But of course, officers have been supporting the Trust Children and Young People's plan through its development. And indeed, our own Children and Young People's strategy did come through various processes of this council. In terms of young carers, just as you'll note from the report, there are the Roxy, Voice of Oxfordshire Youth, have a very proactive role on this council. I know, on the trust, and I know that they would indeed support that, and I will pass that feedback back. I think it's a really good point. So thank you.
Craig.
Yes, thank you very much for this report back. As a sort of parent of a teenage sort of child, the thing that I find, is, the thing that shocks me most, looking at my daughter and her friends, and is I generally see, good quality education. We always look back to what happened when we were at school. Generally see that there has been improvements in general education. People seem to gain well-rounded education and growing up as well-rounded individuals. But I see a shocking rise in mental health issues amongst children. And, the number of my daughter's friends on antidepressants is just absolutely shocking. And that's just come out of nowhere, and I've noticed it in the last sort of few years. And I noticed it's the Health Improvement Board have sort of mental well-being as part of their framework, and the trust reports to them. I'm just surprised it doesn't appear. I see lots of nods when I mention it around the chamber. I'm just surprised there's not more work in that on support services for children.
Well, it's something that certainly I track that data when I go to the Trust and raise that issue consistently, and it's why we included mental health as one aspect of our own children and young people's strategy, and within that particularly focusing on the work that we can do through our Youth Ambition team to support children and young people's mental health within schools. And I know that our Youth Ambition team, I was only talking to them this afternoon, know that we're already doing some really focused, targeted work on that. And also us as a city council are doing work through our CEP, our Cultural Education Partnership, to see how the work there can support and improve young people's mental health through the arts. So certainly we follow that thread through. I will continue to keep raising those points because the data and the delays do remain startling, and I will continue to do that. So I think it's a point well made. Thank you.
Okay. We are getting into council tea time here. I know Marie has to go at 1:45. Shyster, if you have a very quick question, and Tom, if you can ask them both questions, and then we'll get response.
Just a point I wanted to raise, just to echo Craig, your point about mental health. I also think it's very essential to point out here as well that mental health issues have been compounded by rising open racism, which affecting young people, and in particular Islamophobia. There's a percentage of children in our city, millennial children who are seeing these dominant images, Islamophobic images, which allegedly represent them, and that is the only image that they're seeing is also having a profound impact on their mental health. So alongside LGBTQI issues, which I absolutely 100% endorse the work that you're doing, I think this is also a really important issue that we need to focus on. And when children do want to talk about what's happening to them, the prevent legislation means that they sometimes feel that they can't, and neither do their parents. So this is compounding this as well.
Tom?
Very quickly, the voluntary and charitable sector are a really key deliverer of services and advice and information around the county. And under the government's plans for an integrated care system, the Health and Wellbeing Board will be absolutely crucial to that care system. But the voluntary and charitable sector don't have a place in the Health and Wellbeing Board. And I think that potentially strips out a really important voice in standing up for children. And I would welcome Louise's thoughts about how we could try and guarantee such a place for children through that route.
So I'll go to Tom's first. When I was on the Health Improvement Board and the Health and Wellbeing Board, actually endorsed that the charitable sector should have a place at that table when it was going through the reorganisation process. I know that there was a very detailed report that did come to the Children's Trust, which was specifically on the availability of charitable and voluntary organisations across Oxfordshire and the role that they provide in supporting statutory services. And so they came and presented that report. So via that route, I would say they have had quite a strong role, but that would be strengthened. I mean, I believe they ought to have a place at the table on those other two boards. It's as simple as that. Going to Schleister's really important point, I'm speaking again really in terms of the work that we're doing in the City Council. I know I've asked our Youth Ambition teams to look at how this work can be done following the motion that we had to council on the changing definitions of Islamophobia, and I think that's something that our Youth Ambition team are picking up and taking forward, and it's really important. I will raise that issue at the next Children's Trust. I asked that the BAME attainment was something that was included in the Children and Young People's plan, because as you will be aware, the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment highlighted that actually there's a 5% BAME attainment gap in this county, one of the highest in the southeast, which is absolutely shocking. And although that is a separate issue, actually for children to feel that they are valued and that they are supported and don't face Islamophobia and race-related hatred, no doubt has a link to their ability to perform well at school, and I think that the two things have to speak to each other. So I will raise that point in that particular context now that the BAME attainment issue is in the Children and Young People's Plan.
Okay, we need to note those two reports. Can we so do? And can we be back by 7:10, please?
Right.
Thank you. Please be seated. We now move to addresses from members of the public, and I'll take on the first one, Alistair Morris. So you have up to 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Alistair Morris and I'm from Marsden. I would like to thank the Council for declaring a climate emergency. My reason for speaking to Council is to raise awareness about the huge potential of trees in the city. We all realise the seriousness of climate breakdown and the need to do much more to combat it. One of the best ways to offset carbon emissions is to plant many more trees. Trees capture carbon and mitigate climate change. They improve air quality significantly and they reduce the summer air temperatures in cities by several degrees. To get life-threatening temperature rises under control, we almost need to go on a war footing. The IPCC says we've got 11.5 years, whereas XR say we've only got 6 years to try and get this under control. Where there is a will, there is a way. So I propose, suggest, plead that we all work constructively, urgently and effectively together to achieve this. For this outcome, we need to be far more creative, imaginative and proactive. Let's not think of problems, but solutions. Let's think laterally and out of the box. So my big thing is trees, lots of trees. It is a fact that they are one of the most effective ways of tackling climate change. 1 trillion trees across the globe would totally cure the current temperature rise in global warming. My hope and your aim should be to plant 10,000, why not 100,000 more trees across the city. And my personal ambition is to plant 1,000 trees in Marston. I will pledge to plant this number with your help and support. This can be easily done if there is the willpower, cooperation and support from everyone. There is plenty of space, e.g. sections of city parks, roadside verges, the edges of playing fields, etc. We have just recently secured permission from city parks to plant a small community woodland in New Marston Recreation Ground. This is good news, but we can and should be doing far, far more. Community groups, volunteers and local residents can all help. We need to do this. If the council could help supply trees and recommend the most suitable tree types and perhaps suggest, recommend or agree best locations, then we can get on with this. Because trees take time to grow and we only have 11 years, we should be trying to implement this part of the solution next autumn and winter. So we should start planning for this immediately. 10,000 trees might seem daunting, but it really isn't that difficult to plant that number. The important consideration is the aftercare. But we need to encourage everyone to get involved, and community groups would be a good start, along with interested individual residents. We need to give more power and responsibility to our citizens by organising planting crews and aftercare groups, even perhaps using council equipment out of hours with possibly volunteer staff supervision if need be. There may be complications with insurance, liability, care, legality, etc., but these can be resolved. Where there is a will, there will be a way. In conjunction and in support of this, I would like you to seriously consider introducing a 100-metre buffer zone of, instead of ring of trees, instead of ring of steel, of ring of trees around the whole city before any further development occurs. This would have the benefit of keeping the city boundary distinct, break up urban sprawl, make for a more attractive and healthier environment, and soak up pollution. You could insist on this before more expansion occurs, and that developers incorporate this into their plans, even at greater cost. Needs must. You could also create a circular cycle track and walking running track around the city. I'm sure this would prove to be extremely popular. Let's make Oxford more green and an even more pleasant place to live, as well as firmly demonstrating the city's total commitment to seriously tackling climate change. We all need to do this, and we need to do it now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next year. Thank you. And P.S. Can we give Greta the freedom of the city?
Councillor Hayes, I see there is a written response. Do you wish to add to that?
Briefly to it. I want to thank Mr. Morris for coming. I think that's one of my favourite addresses that I've had. I completely agree with you about Greta in terms of coming to Oxford. It would be fantastic for her to come and speak and mobilise and energise so many young people in our city. I want to pick out some particular points from the written response, in large part because some people in the gallery might not have the chance of seeing this. So I want to start by immediately saying that I support what you're saying about the important role that trees play in offsetting carbon emissions in the city. Each tree has the potential to sequester 1 tonne of carbon dioxide by the time it is 40 years old. That being the case, we obviously need to start soon where we to do this. Trees also provide us with opportunities for adaptation to climate change through the protection against flooding and excess heat. We welcome the calls for an improved urban forest, and as a landowner we are working to ensure that opportunities for appropriate tree planting is taken on our sites. We've already planted trees across many of our parks and made management changes which sees more wildflowers and less intensively managed land. Through our role as a local planning authority, we also seek opportunities to ensure trees are planted as part of many planning proposals, and to really understand the value of the city's trees and to inform our future planning of Oxford's urban forest. We've undertaken a tree canopy cover assessment and an iTree eco project survey of the entire tree population in the city, with the aim of assessing existing baseline tree cover, identifying the key characteristics of the tree population, and to quantify the functional ecosystem benefits provided by trees. The early signs are positive. They're showing that Oxford's urban forest can be really important. And of course, much of the forest and trees are in private ownership, so we therefore all need to work in partnership to maintain, improve and increase the extent of the city's urban forest. I want to thank you for the active lead that you played, the active lead of your community group, and it's a great example of what happens when the community and the city council come together, and I hope to see more of it. Thank you.
Now have Dr. Graham Jones, procedures for assessing minor planning and licensing applications. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Fellow residents, and I hope to say to Council to review procedures for assessing minor planning and licensing applications relating to licensed premises in residential areas. The James Street Tavern between James Street and Crown Street off Cowley Road has a beer garden where drinking is permitted, which has been rarely used as such. In November, the owner's Green King applied for planning permission for signage, advertising the yard at James Street Tavern and street food. It was approved by officers as a minor matter on January 29th. On February 1st, a planning application was made for a minor variation of the pub's layout. Replacement of structures behind the pub, seating, paving, large overhead sail covers, barbecue and fairy lights crisscrossing the car park. Again, dealt with by an officer, not called in to committee. On February 28th, a third application sought a change in the licence to cover the alterations. This too was dealt with by officers not brought to licensing panel. The owners sought publicity about refurbishment through the Oxford Mail, which reported their intention to improve the pub's image and the offer to residents. What was not said, but would have become very clear to anyone viewing the applications together, is that the plan was to open a sort of Tivoli Gardens in the middle of a residential neighbourhood, with all the attendant noise and glare. Businesses may operate as they wish within the constraints of statute, and in a different area, the scheme would have been welcome. The owners are to be applauded for renovating the property and investing in our area. However, sandwiched between two residential streets is no place for a beer garden, even if 50 yards from Cowley Road in what some regard as Party City. There are young children growing up in these houses and people in old age. People in Crown Street already have their fill of noise and bad behaviour from the Swan. At James Street Tavern recently, a drunken party of men outside the pub left after 2 hours' rowdiness, openly urinating on cars, walls and in the middle of the road. A resident of Crown Street says they now fear having noise and disturbance in front of their houses and at the rear. No notices of the applications were posted in Crown Street, just one in James Street. The new business model is evident in the signage, neon-lit and stenciled lettering in designer grunge, matching the drab grey which has replaced the smart white of the pub's Victorian facade, advertising not a garden but a yard. Serving food is welcome, but it is burgers and crepes, more fast food in a neighbourhood drowning in fast food. Street food hints at yet more litter. Officers acted properly. Conditions were imposed and plans revised. No music, additional lighting, or use of the yard up from 10:30, and removal of sail covers and fairy lights, but only after I and Ward Councillors I alerted objected to the applications at a very late stage. having understood they were for an upmarket gastropub and ignorant of the beer garden plans. Procedures seemed not conducive to joined-up administration. Had the three minor applications been viewed in relation to each other, this major scheme could have been assessed holistically, brought to committee and licensing panel, and stronger conditions debated to better protect the public realm and neighbours' interests. The police, hard pushed in East Oxford to contain the epidemic of drug and alcohol abuse, have for years, with the support of councillors and residents, worked hard to uphold the area's alcohol saturation policy. They may have wished to speak to the licensing panel about this doubling of the pub's drinking area, while incidentally leaving just one ladies' toilet and none for the disabled. We urge Council to remit this issue of procedure to the Scrutiny Committee so that similar schemes can be subject to improved governance. The current system incentivises the trade to submit a succession of small incremental changes so that they all be classed as minor and therefore avoid proper scrutiny and public accountability. Thank you, Lord Mayor, and to Councillor Hollingsworth for his written response.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth, do you wish to
Yes, two things briefly. For those who haven't read the written response, we are, as an authority, dealing with two different things here, two different processes, a planning process and a licensing process. Each is governed by its own separate laws. It is not possible under those laws to join them together. The other point is a more personal point, and for the avoidance of any ambiguity. The licensee of the new licensee, I hasten to add, of the James Street Tavern is also the licensee for a pub on my road. It's a few yards from my house. I know him as a result of drinking in his pub. I've had a member of my family work for him. I know that my experience and the experience of my neighbours is that he rules his pub with a rod of iron. And whether to be any difficulties, I'm quite sure you'll find a licensee who is looking to achieve the best possible relationship with all of their neighbours. But in terms of the process issue, we are unable to join together two pieces of legislation that the government has over the last 70 years seen fit not to.
Thank you. We now have Izzy and Camilla. Welcome. You have up to 5 minutes.
Hi everyone, we're here today to discuss our petition and how you can help us improve the standard of living via sustainability in education. Recently, you announced a climate emergency within Oxfordshire. This is a great step towards tackling the climate crisis, and we thank you for that. We feel passionately about this because the future of our planet is at stake. We believe that the key way to combat climate change and make Oxford as sustainable as possible is through education and the examples our schools set to future generations. Our petition calls for climate change to be made a core part of the national curriculum, and that sustainability is made a serious concern within the education system. Our petition asks for the ecological and climate crisis to be made an educational priority, for well-founded, evidence-based training for teachers so that they are properly equipped to teach the future generations, for the immediate overhaul of the current curriculum in favour of one that aims to prepare children for the realities of their future, and for sustainability judgment criteria to be added to offset values so that schools must practice what they teach as they act as the main role models to children as they grow up. So far, we have had 69,000 signatures. We have been in newspapers such as the Oxford Mail and the Daily Mail, and we have been on World Service Radio and the BBC. We never thought we would get this far, however, we need to do more. We need you, our council, to support our cause and to make Oxford the start of an educational movement that could save our planet and give all future generations the knowledge they require to make the change we need to tackle climate change. The first way that you can help us is by lobbying Parliament to get our goals discussed and recognised. This is the next step on a larger national level, and it would be great if you could help us to achieve this. Whilst that is important, we are also interested in what we can improve within Oxford in terms of sustainability and education. Oxford, supposedly a cycling city, still has a massive problems with driving. We could improve Oxford's climate by reducing the amount of emissions caused by students driving to school unnecessarily, really making school areas low emission zones. People quite often forget how relatively small Oxford is, and there are so many sustainable options for students to travel that should be encouraged. Oxford is an amazing city that has all sorts of opportunities and is a hub of culture and history. By cutting down emissions caused by school runs, we can hopefully keep our city as beautiful as now. It will not only reduce pollution, but also create an environment that is not dominated by traffic. Another crucial point we need your help addressing is waste in schools. As we see it, every day, tons of recyclable rubbish and food waste that can be converted into energy is thrown into regular waste. We need you to put sustainable limits on environmentally friendly orders to goods in schools. Schools must have proper separate bins so food, recycling and general waste aren't all thrown together, and we need you to put an appropriate cap on the amount of waste and electricity schools use, and as well as the materials they consume and how much they can consume. You can help by placing these limits on the schools in Oxford and by making sure schools have the appropriate resources to deal with waste. Our previous 2 points on how you can help us are largely sustainability goals. However, the educational side must also be brought to attention. Within Oxford, we have an array of primary schools, secondary schools and universities. Within the universities, we have many qualified teachers who specialise in subjects based around climate change, be that from a political, geographical, humanitarian or scientific point of view. One of these teachers is Dr. Kevin Gretsch, who works at the University of Oxford. Dr. Gretsch got in touch with us after seeing our petition and offered to work with us to organise lectures and Q&A sessions for teachers and students at our school. He said, "There is so much expertise in Oxford about climate change. Wouldn't it be great to share it and to discuss it with interested people?" This is something that we strongly agree with, as there is so much knowledge that can be shared and so many people like Dr. Gretsch. We have the university equipped to teach people about the problems we are facing. We want to create links between Oxford's universities and lower education, possibly by council-funded programmes, that will enable the younger generations to learn about the future we face and how to stop it. This will not only create a pool of knowledge benefiting our youth, but enrich Oxford by linking our education system together, which will make a more united Oxford. Through these changes in the way our education system is run, we hope to create a better, greener future. The help that you can give in terms of waste, vehicle limits, lobbying Parliament, and creating links between higher and lower education would make Oxford the pioneer of tackling climate change within the UK. These could potentially have a domino effect and help the rest of the UK to recognise that we need to change and the way we view the education system. It's not just about exam results, but preparing children for their future and setting an example of what a sustainable world could and should look like. We hope that you can help us make it easier for schools to do these things and to push our goals to Parliament to help make the change our nation needs to see. Thank you so much for having us here today, and we hope you will consider what we're asking for. Our future and our children's future depends on it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hayes, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's an absolute privilege to respond to that statement. I thought that was absolutely truly exceptional. And on behalf of Oxford City Council, as I think you may have gathered, we want to send our thanks for your visit here. We want to send our thanks for your petition and our thanks for your campaigning. We wish you every single success going forward in the future. On the specifics that you suggest, we'll take a very close look at them and we'll be in touch very soon. On the question of lobbying for Parliament, I know anecdotally that Andy Dodds is very aware of your campaign already and engaged with the issue, and I'm sure too that Lennon Moran is, and we will be in touch with both of the MPs in a formal way to make sure that we can do that lobbying on your behalf. And I want to say it's not just the Oxford Mail that you're in the big issue. I literally opened it today because I was having my morning coffee and came across it. I know you've not had a coffee yet, so I'll give you that. And then just to say two more things. First of all, you're doing Oxford extremely proud, and you're doing your school very proud. There's many people here who have got very close links to Jenny Indeed, who have played a really key role in helping to develop this agenda. And then second of all, I want to talk a bit about why it's so important that you are here. And it's down fundamentally to the fact that the whole issue of climate change is wrapped up in the issue of intergenerational justice. And so the thing that I'm quite struck by is that in 2030, which is obviously the key date that's been announced by the UN, you as I understand your age right now, you'll be 26 years of age. You'll be in a position, hopefully, to be helping to make Oxford an even better place, hopefully making the country a better place. But in order for that to happen, we need more politicians at the national level to be cracking on and getting stuck into tackling climate change right now. And that's why it's so important that you're bringing this campaign here, and our lobbying with you as national MPs is so important. But I think there's a second thing here as well, which is that when we look at people who are making decisions at the national level, they're overwhelmingly people who aren't going to be facing the consequences of the decisions that they take. In 2066, not to age you, you will be the current age of the current Prime Minister. That's very far away. Yet we don't know what world we'll be facing in 2066, given the decisions that the current Prime Minister is taking. So anything that we can do to amplify your voices, anything that we can do as councillors and a council to make sure that younger people in our city are able to share their views is absolutely crucial. And I want you to have confidence that we have convictions that we will move forward quickly on our zero carbon agenda. We've got a motion where we'll be debating this later at great length, so if you want to stick around and hear more about it. But I think I want to close, now that I've heard that, just by quoting that Titan word and thought, Maya Angelou, who said, "Do the best you can until you know better, then when you know better, do better." We thought all along as a city and a country and a world that we'd be doing our best, but we now know better. So it's incumbent on all of us, working with all the community, to do better.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Armstrong, you have up to 5 minutes.
Oxford City Council is to be commended for its brave decision to twin with Ramallah, as this gesture draws precious attention to the militarised suffering and judicially enforced racial discrimination endured by the Semitic and Islamic people of Palestine. However, Oxford City Council also professes its intolerance for racism, with the Prime Minister of Israel writing on March the 11th, 2019 that Israel, I quote, is not a state of all its citizens, adding that according to the basic law we passed, Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people and they have exclusive right to self-determination in it. The Prime Minister of Israel's statement was reported by most news agencies worldwide. If England, France or Germany were to announce that their laws granted greater rights and self-determination to their English, French or German citizens only, whilst publicly discriminating against its Islamic citizens, Justice Promotion nations of the world would be very concerned and would seek to shun England, France and Germany. The policy of Israel is racial discrimination against the native Islamic Semitic people of Israel. And this policy is racial discrimination against all non-Jewish people who live in the state of Israel. For this reason, I call on Oxford City Council to rescind its 2018 decision to adopt and implement the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance policy until the Jewish-only state of Israel rescinds its blatantly racist and discriminatory laws, which sadly receives the full support of the Israeli Prime Minister and members of their Knesset. Human history teaches that evil flourishes when people of conscience remain silent, when evil deeds are perpetrated. Thank you.
Councillor Brown, would you wish to add to your response?
I don't, well, I'll add a little bit to it, but I'll also read it out for the sake of people who may not have seen it. I've been very clear in this chamber previously in expressing my condemnation for Israel's 2018 nation-state law. In fact, the first time I did so was actually at the point at which we adopted the definition, the IHRA definition against anti-Semitism. And I know that the country's president has criticised the Prime Minister for his comments last month that Israel is not a state of all its citizens. But I absolutely don't follow your logic of fighting racism with anti-Semitism. The Labour Party, the Liberal Democrat Party, the Conservative Party have all adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and my understanding is that the Greens are also to debate it at their spring conference in June. That definition makes clear that criticism of Israel, similar to that levelled against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. There are over 1,000 Jewish residents in Oxford today. Indeed, there has been a Jewish community here in Oxford since 1080, initially located right here on St Aldate's. While they suffered anti-Semitism, expulsion and expropriation over the centuries, Jewish scholars suggest that Oxford was always a more tolerant and harmonious place than many other cities in medieval England. Let's keep it that way.
Thank you. Now, Judith Harley, you have up to 5 minutes.
Lord Mayor, Councillors, to comply with conditions attached to the 2017 grant of planning permission for the expansion of the Cowley Marsh Depot and upgrading of the Cowley Marsh car park, Oxford City Council recently proposed a parking places order to change parking provision at Cowley Marsh car park. The deadline for submitting objections to this has just passed, and I'm addressing the Council today about difficulties associated with submitting such comments. First, in order to view the relevant document, members of the public had to visit Oxford Town Hall on a Monday to Friday between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. This is impractical or impossible for most working people. Indeed, I managed to view the document only a week before the formal deadline for submitting comments. Given the online availability of various council documents in today's internet age, it is somewhat antiquated that neither this document nor the original 2011 order to which it referred were available via online links. Second, instructions for submitting comments to this order requested that objections should be sent in writing to St Aldate's Chambers. No email comments were invited and no email address was given on the order notification. This and the absence of online documents placed considerable obstacles in the way of anyone of working age used to communicating via the internet, as is common practice for much council business, who wish to comment. In the week before Easter, I raised these and other points with those council officers who were still working and not away on holiday. All officers who replied were extremely helpful, and by close of business on morning Thursday, had provided electronic versions of relevant documents and email addresses for receiving comments. I am very grateful for their courteous and timely help and cooperation, which allowed me and several of my neighbours to make appropriate and informed comments with an extended deadline, and I would like to thank all those officers concerned. I am asking the Council that all future consultations of this or any other nature and any supporting documentation be available through online links as well as in paper format for ease of unlimited access to the general public. I am also asking that it be made possible to email responses for any and all consultations, not just for comments to be in writing. I understand that following my communications with officers, this might be investigated by the head of law and governance, but I am asking the Council to support my request and bring it to being. Regarding the consultation itself, the Council's reasons for justifying the proposed charges at Cowley Marsh car park made no mention of the car park serving recreational users of Cowley Marsh Park. This car park should be primarily for the benefit of users of Cowley Marsh Park, especially families, and for local residents and businesses,
and to reduce neighbourhood parking problems, not just to provide general off-street parking for all and sundry, and especially not to provide unlimited free parking for employees of the adjacent private company, ODS Limited. I have suggested changes in the proposed structure and fees to recognise that Caroline Car Park is meant to support and promote the recreational use of the marsh, and to encourage everyone to embrace a healthy lifestyle. Photos taken by local residents show that daytime use of the car park coincides with the main hours of working of ODS Limited, with the car park full until around 2 to 3 p.m, when many ODS employees leave work. Then there is plenty of space for the rest of the day and evening. I have also requested that the start date for implementing charging of 1st May should be delayed until a satisfactory solution has been found to limit the parking required by ODS Limited employees without the imposition of a CPZ. I am asking Council to work with residents to resolve parking problems created by ODS employees, in addition to asking that all Council consultations be made electronic. I hope that you will all support both requests. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsworth, do you wish to add anything to your written response? Thank you. Thank you very much. We now move back to the agenda. I think if we cover item 15 on page 251 of the main agenda, Scrutiny Committee Update Report. Councillor Gant.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I won't add much to the report that's in front of members. I would just very much like to thank all members who've served on the committee this year, since our next meeting will fall in the next council year. We've had some excellent and detailed debates, and indeed board members and officers who've given up their time to attend and occasionally been kept waiting, which I regret, but sometimes it's beyond my control. Particularly like to thank our excellent officer, Stefan, and our clerk, John. As for our substantive business, I won't go through everything that we've done, but perhaps just mention we've given a great deal of attention to the Council's contract with Fusion Lifestyle, and have had the opportunity to see the audit that we requested, which also went to Audit and Governance, which has been very helpful and very constructive, and I think we now have a clearer understanding of the issues facing Fusion and how they're going to go about it, and I'm grateful to their senior management for contributing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions to Councillor Gant? Craig?
Yes, just thanking Councillor Gant for his work as chair over the last year, but also just to maybe put you on the spot slightly about the work plan for next year, because I know there's been a large number of ideas come forward from council. I just want to know where we are with rating those and ranking those.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. But just to say that although we have had a large number of ideas, if members have got any more, please let us have them. The short answer is I'm seeing Stefan tomorrow.
Thank you. Unless there are any further questions, that update report is for noting. I think Council can so do. I'm not seeing any dissension from that. In that case, we now move on to item 16 in the briefing note, motions on notice. We have up to 60 minutes to cover this, so up to 10 to 9. I understand, Councillor Wolfe, that you have accepted Councillor, let's get this right, Harris's amendment, but not Councillor Hayes. We will proceed on that basis. Councillor Wolfe.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm not proposing to rehearse the climate emergency debate here. I think that one's been fully aired, and in this chamber in January, an emergency has been unanimously declared. So this further motion is about what our follow-up should be. And we've already agreed, the Citizens' Assembly, that was in the original motion. So there are 7 proposed actions, all of them I believe to be deliverable, not wishful thinking. I'm only going to actually address, because I've only got 3 minutes, a couple of these. Looking at that list, 7 actions, numbers 2, 3, 5 and 7 are doable from tomorrow morning. Item 6, which is to draw up an action plan, is deliverable probably within 4 months. 6 is generous, and Councillor Hayes has already indicated in questions that we've got a sustainability strategy coming up later in the year. So item 6 is covered. So I'm going to focus on items 1 and 4. And I'm going to take item 1, the 2030 target, last. Item 4 calls on us to use our influence to ensure the 2030 targets reflected in the Oxfordshire Plan 2050 and its associated plans and strategies, including Oxford's own local plan. It is, of course, already too late to amend our existing local plan, which has already gone to the Secretary of State, was passed by Council last November. I suppose there's the possibility that the planning inspector might feel that the 2030 target is more appropriate in our local plan, but I somehow think it's unlikely. However, the 5 district councils with which we're collaborating are already working together on the Oxfordshire Plan 2050, and as part of that process, 4 years down the line, our own plan will, I think, be up for tweaking. We're already getting signs that the county itself and the districts are also persuaded of the climate emergency and will not be entirely hostile to the idea of bringing a target date forward. So all this motion does really is align ourselves with what they are also doing. And so to item 1, which I suppose is the big one, the pledge to make Oxford City Council carbon neutral by 2030. Firstly, I need to say, it doesn't need saying, Oxford and Oxford City Council are not the same thing. This is about what it is within our power to do. This council, as you will know, is only directly responsible for 1 or 2% of the city's overall carbon emissions. Many of our operations are not big carbon emission generators, but some are. As Councillor Harris has noted, housing is the biggie. But we believe that with sufficient political will, carbon neutrality is achievable by 2030. We could get very hung up on new build housing. Actually, my own feeling is that that is the low-hanging fruit with sufficient planning permission.
Councillor Wolfe, I think you'll need to carry on your argument as part of your summing up.
That's fine, I'm almost there, Lord Mayor, so that will do.
Good, thank you. We now move to the seconder. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Simmons, and do you wish to speak?
I'll reserve my right to speak, thank you.
Thank you. We have an amendment in the name of Councillor Hayes, I believe seconded by Councillor Brown. Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Like Councillor Wolfe, I won't rehearse the climate emergency debate that we had, although I think it's fair to say from what we've heard tonight, everybody's very alive to just how quickly we need to act as a city, as a country, and as a world. This is a thorny issue, and I'm going to address number 1 particularly, which is around the deadline of 2030. Councillor Wolfe himself said earlier today that it was just a few short months since we passed the climate emergency motion, and so there is a significant body of work which is happening at an accelerated pace in order to develop plans so that we can work towards a deadline as quickly as possible. And the motion amendment that I propose is intended to make very plain we have the strongest possible ambition to get to 2030, if not sooner. I want to make that absolutely clear. That is our vision, that is our strong vision, that is a vision around which all of my group are united, and I think it's a vision around which all of this council is united. If we can get there by 28, 27, 26, that's great. But I think it's also worth being honest with everybody about the challenges we face. And this isn't me shifting the blame, but we have a government fundamentally that is not committed to decarbonisation of the electricity grid that we so desperately need. And with that being so, it's almost impossible for any city to be carbon neutral. We need to have a change of government. We need a Labour government that is going to be honest about the challenges we face, make the investments we need, and get us to a carbon neutral city council far faster than 2030. And I think it's also worth dwelling on why this is such a thorny issue. I alluded to some of it earlier. There's the question of intergenerational justice. There's the points that have been raised earlier about do we build more homes when the additional outlay involved in building zero carbon homes is significant still. Do we build them zero carbon? How do we transform nothing less than our entire broken economy? It's not just that we need to get to zero carbon as a country and as an economy, we need to be exploiting the opportunities which come out of growing our renewable sector. We need to be exploiting inclusive growth. How do we do that? And these are things which this Labour group, my friends and colleagues on this side, are focused on, and we're working towards, shaped by our values. The date debate matters. It absolutely matters. But so too does the debate matter because it's a gateway to the bigger debate. It's a gateway to the debate about solutions. So at the last budget, the Greens came forward with some proposals totaling a sum of money, which I think it's fair to say, Craig, you acknowledged in some cases were flying a flag. It was proposing ideas to see whether they could work. It's been a few months since the Green budget. Where are the solutions? I want people to come to me with solutions. It's a high ambition council. We're working hard to introduce zero carbon measures, and I want us to go further. And I think it's worth remembering just how far we've come and just how possible those solutions are. And I don't say the following in order to be defensive or to beat a party political drum. I say it because in a time of powerlessness, with so many people are feeling like they can't do anything to tackle climate change, people in the gallery and outside in the city need to know that we can do something, that we are doing something, and more is possible. And so, just in the last year, we proposed a zero emission zone from 2020. We'll also have electric black cars by 2025.
Councillor Hayes, I think you're going to have to continue that argument when you sum up. Councillor Brown, do you wish to speak now, or?
I'll reserve my right to speak, please.
Thank you. We now move into debate on the amendment. Can I see those who would like to speak? I see Councillor Harris.
I oppose the amendment for two main reasons. First of all, the motion is entirely sensible and adequate as it stands. Secondly, what Councillor Hayes' amendment is actually doing is delaying action. It's blaming everything on the Conservative government, and it's proposing to postpone doing anything until after the Citizens' Assembly scheduled for the autumn. The three matters that I put in my amendment are all matters on which action can be started immediately. The Council now has power since June last year to impose its own stricter energy standards on new build houses than national standards, which it didn't have before. It can start work on considering suitable new standards. And I'm sure that on that issue, my colleagues and I would be happy to work cross-party if there's actually going to be some action. And similarly, in December, Councillor Landell Mills and I proposed that heavily polluting lorries and coaches should be banned from the city. We also proposed buses. It's nice that you've acted on that, but why aren't you acting on the other two? There's nothing to hold you up from attempting to do that now. And similarly, converting your own vehicle fleet as fast as possible. None of these things are going to be opposed by the Citizens' Assembly. You should be starting work now, and this amendment is really a distraction and a way of preventing the very sensible Green motion from actually taking effect. So I call on everyone, regardless of party, to oppose this amendment.
Craig.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Harris. It's very clear that people want urgent action on climate change, and I genuinely believe Councillor Hayes does as well. We've seen, very passionate speeches from Tom at this council and previously, so I'm slightly puzzled by this motion, by this amendment. And I'm asking councillors not to support it for three very good reasons. First, it removes the 2030 target. Secondly, it delegates responsibility for climate science to the Citizens' Assembly. Now, there's lots of good things we should be consulting Citizens' Assembly about, but the viability of a 2030 target and when that target should be set is a matter of science. It's not a matter for a Citizens' Assembly to debate. And the third reason is it seeks, at the end of it, to stifle further debate. It talks about discouraging submission of further motions on climate change. I think it's wrong to try and stifle debate on this very important issue. And I'd just like to compare the response we've got to the Public Spaces Protection Order debate, which is earlier in the Council, whereby we're consulting members of the public on what they think is acceptable behaviour in the city centre, quite right that we do. But the response from you, Tom, was to say, if they come up with saying anything about criminalising homelessness, we won't listen to them because we as a council don't agree with criminalising homelessness. So even if that comes back from the consultation, we won't accept that. And quite right too. And we should be setting the same red lines that we do on climate change to say, 2030 target is set in stone, it's a red line, it won't be crossed. Doesn't matter what Citizen Assembly says, 2030 is the target that we will need to stick to, because that's what the climate science says. So they're very different responses to very different things. And you're right in everything you've said. You know, it's about intergenerational justice, it's about long-termism, not short-termism. It's about climate change is a social justice issue, it's not an environmental issue. And as you said, we now know better. And even the county Labour group supported a 2030 target, so why not the city Labour group? So please vote against this amendment and support the original motion. Thank you.
Councillor Wolfe and then Hosny.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I have to say, the amendment does not do what Councillor Hayes claims, and it doesn't send the message that he claims that it does, because when I read it, my heart sank and I thought, here we go, it's begun, scale back the ambition, introduce delay. Now, that may not have been the intention, but that's what came over to me very clearly. Now, I know from an article that Councillor Hayes has written on the Labour Environment Campaign, Sarah's website, that he's concerned about the tension between social justice issues, social inequality, and responding to climate change. And I would share the concern about social justice, but I think it's a false dichotomy, because the forces that are driving social inequality are the same forces as are driving climate change. There is no fundamental difference there in that. Now, there may be that there's a few little tweaks along the way where there are hard choices to be made, where we need to deliberate a little bit, but fundamentally, the poor and the disadvantaged are not going to lose at all. They're the ones who are losing most from climate change. And that's true in this country as it is everywhere. So, you know, it doesn't help at all, this motion, and we really need to be dropping it. I really don't think we can silence councillors from bringing motions to council. It seems to be suggesting the monitoring officer is asked to block any further council motions. Lord Mayor, I don't think she has the authority to actually do that, but perhaps you could ask her to confirm this. Nothing wrong with the Citizens' Assembly, it's a good, solid, green idea, frankly. It is excellent to have it working in parallel with the council to broaden, inform debate, guard us against unintended consequences, because there may be some, and come up with further creative solutions. But it is this council that sets its agenda, and the council that bears the responsibility for acting on its own declaration. It is not to be used as an excuse to delay action, absolve this council of its leadership responsibility, and stifle debate. And this amendment seeks to do all three.
We have all been truly inspired by the actions that we've seen outside, and in fact I want to congratulate our City Council group that there has been a lot of action on this issue already, and actually the Citizens' Assembly part, we discussed this at length in group, and we all agree that we are aiming to get to zero carbon by 2030, and the Citizens' Assembly is a process by which the how will be answered, and not that target of 2030. So I want to say that that is actually an incorrect understanding of where we are with the Citizens' Assembly point. Sorry?
We're having...
It's not, and from the point of view of, I do think that there are lots of connected issues, and the Labour City Council and the Labour and a transformational Labour government will really be at the forefront of this, because the most devastating impact will be felt and is felt by natural disasters and forced migration affecting physical and mental health, and it's borne by the poor and marginalised. And in this City Council, we have those people at the forefront of all of our policies. And I lived through the Iran-Iraq war, and the UK was heavily involved in this 8-year devastating war, supplying weapons to both sides, and we asked why. And we are using our current economic systems to subsidise war in the world, to empower people to make weapons of war, rather than using our system to create jobs at home, which will free us from the consequence of climate change. And I really believe that this council will be and is part of a transformational government led by Jeremy Corbyn that will tie in climate change, foreign policy and the lives of the most marginalised in the UK and abroad in the form of a Green New Deal. So I really urge you to support the amendment put forward by Councillor Hayes.
Councillor Howard and then Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. So I'm really pleased that this motion has been brought. I'm really pleased that we're having this debate, and I'll be supporting Councillor Hayes' amendment. And the reason that I'll be supporting it is, I want to address I think perhaps the confusion that's come up here. So we heard from Councillor Wolfe the fear that the key part of this motion of working towards a 2030 target had been completely pulled from it. That certainly isn't the case. The language that I have here on a piece of paper in front of me does contain that in item 1. I understand there might have been some sort of clerical error earlier in the day, if I've got this right, which meant that it didn't make it into the version which appeared on ModGov, which for those in the gallery is the means by which councillors are able to see council papers. And so I guess I just want to be sure that it's made it to Green and Lib Dem colleagues, that language is in there. And I think that's absolutely fundamental. Of course, we're just talking about the council's own emissions, which just account for about 1% of city-wide emissions. Fundamentally, we have to be working towards a target like this for the whole city. I would certainly support seeing a target of 2030 for the whole city to be zero carbon. I'm really pleased that we've got the Citizens' Assembly as part of the process working towards that. Certainly don't think it should be the whole process, but I think it's a fantastic part of that process that we're involving a representative sample of citizens of our city and helping us think together about how we reach a really ambitious goal like that, because it is ambitious, it will be incredibly hard, and I think getting the ideas and opinions of a representative sample of citizens is a brilliant idea, and I'm really pleased we're doing it. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to be absolutely sure that all colleagues in the room are aware that 2030 date is in here. And lastly, I suppose I really want to pay homage to the movements outside of this building, which I think are sort of creating the political space that allow ambitious, bold targets like this to be set. I'd particularly mention the student strikes. I'd particularly mention Extinction Rebellion. I was involved myself for a lot of my 20s. I was part of a movement, the Camp for Climate Action, using civil disobedience against causes of climate change. So I know the power of direct action. I think it can play a really important role in shifting the political landscape in a country and raising really important issues like this up the agenda. And it's given me a huge amount of hope and inspiration, the fact that these movements have gained so much support, and I really hope that we as politicians respond to that, move into that political space, be as bold as we can, and do what we can to support those movements. Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth and then Councillor Rowley.
It's good to follow on from Richard, not just because he's my fellow ward councillor, because I think we represent possibly two different strands of achieving things. Direct action is very important. It puts issues on the agenda and it raises them up that agenda. And then people like me who like spreadsheets get to do the tedious stuff of working out how to deliver them. I've got 4 comments. 3 of them relate to Councillor Harris. It's just because he named 3 things. So the 3 things that were in his amendment and which were in his speech, which we could do, he said. Let me go through them. Stricter energy efficiency for buildings. That is already being done. It is in local plan policy RE1, debated at huge length in this council and reflected in various answers to questions from Councillor Wolfe. I do urge the Liberal Democrat group to read the local plan before commenting on it. It seems to be something of an issue today. Second, conversion of the vehicle fleet to electric vehicles. That is underway. I'll leave Councillor Chapman, if he so wishes, to comment on that, but it is happening. Obviously, it can't be done fully until somebody develops an electric refuse vehicle, but as soon as they do, I would hope that this council will be at the forefront of acquiring them. And in terms of banning coaches and heavy vehicles, I'm sure the council is aware that we are not the transport authority and therefore have no powers to do any such thing. However, what we do have, and this is where the boring behind closed doors, tedious conversation bit comes in, is work that Councillor Hayes and I are doing with our colleagues on the county council to try and persuade them. And do bear in mind, most of them represent rural seats who do not see climate emergency in quite the same way as it's seen in this city. I understand the Conservative group had to be dragged kicking and screaming by its progressive members to support the motion in the County Council, and I'm very pleased to say we are working with some of those progressive members within the County Council Conservative group, but bear in mind they are a small minority, to persuade them to do exactly those sorts of things, but it's tedious behind-the-scenes work that will get things done. And finally, our comments on the Citizens' Assembly. I think it's really important that it represents a cross-section of all views. You may not, but I do, get a torrent of communications of various sorts, many of them not entirely friendly, expressing the view that my opinions on reducing car parking, reducing traffic, are, let's put it politely, antithetical to the good running of government in this city. There are many people, including some people in this chamber, who frankly I hope would stop doing this, who are constantly arguing for more car parking in places like the hospital. I've been on record as saying we should not have more car parking at the hospital. I'm well aware that saying so makes me very unpopular with a very large number of people. So I think the Citizens' Assembly has to be part of a process of education as well. It has to represent those views, and those people who believe that at the moment need to, I think this is the education point made by our petitioners earlier, reflect on
Councillor Hollingsworth, I'm afraid your time is up. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. First of all, just to make the point that climate action and social justice should never be opposing goals. It's only government policy that makes them so, via austerity that forces each urgent need to bid for resources against the other urgent needs, and we should say that loud and clear as often as we can. Locally, we have to remember, and to be fair, I think Councillor Wolfe was about to say this before he was cut off by an enthusiastic Lord Mayor. Probably our biggest challenge internally as a council is greening our existing housing stock and buildings. Therefore, we have to make sure that we concentrate our resources where we can make the most difference. If we were to, my fear is that if we were to say, the one thing we will do before everything else is build zero carbon housing from tomorrow, we could end up finding ourselves cutting less carbon than by bringing larger numbers of existing units up to a good standard. Not perfect, but a much better standard than they are now. Some of them are very, very poor indeed. We strive to maintain a consensus for progressive change in Oxford by avoiding promising anything that we don't have very good reason to believe we can deliver. I think that that's healthy for democracy and for faith in politics to work out what the plan is before we make promises. And that, of course, is the point of the Citizens' Assembly, both that and to get the message out on the urgency of climate action to a wider cross-section of the public. Needless to say, if in the minusculely unlikely event that the Citizens' Assembly decides that they don't believe in climate change, that we will of course ignore them because climate change is a scientific fact. But I don't think that's what will happen. I think that this is a great opportunity to get citizens who would never normally discuss the fact that the climate emergency and the fact that we are acknowledged locally to discuss this and then to talk to their friends and their communities and bring everyone in. Citizens will accept more and more radical action on climate if they know why it's necessary and if we're being open to them. That's where I come to the excellent suggestion made by one of the speakers that we should give the freedom of the city to Greta Thunberg. What a statement that would send. And the importance of the movement she started is actually it's the people self-organising and leading the politicians here, which is really as it should be. We possibly talk a bit too much in this chamber, and I'm reminded of the sometimes we ought to be a bit like the long ago French opposition leader, Le Rollin. We were talking about European things earlier on, so it seems appropriate to quote him. Somebody asked him why he was running down the road sweating in his business suit, chasing a demo, and he said, "Il faut bien les suivre, je suis le chef." I've got to follow them. I'm their leader. So let us learn from the people, and we may not be in the same place. This is the last word. We may not be saying the same things about climate next year, next month, as we are here. We may have new ideas, and that would be a great thing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. I'll cut you a bit of slack because some of those words we didn't understand because they were French. John, and then Councillor Ross Smith. Sorry?
Well, my point has been made.
Thank you.
There's a first. There's a first.
Councillor Ross Smith.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I shall keep my remarks very to the point, which is to the amendment that's being put before us at the moment. I'm absolutely disappointed and very saddened to see the encouragement encouragement not to bring forward more motions. I think that's very bad and very, very anti-democratic. I'm also very saddened to see that they've crossed through the acceptance and wanting to do more to support the organisations such as Youth Strike Climate for Climate. I think that's terrible. I actually see this amendment as a wrecking amendment, and I'm very, very surprised that officers have allowed it to come forward.
Councillor Mills.
I think the point that I was going to make was already made, and this will, the amendment will delay things. Councillor Hollingsworth made the point that three of the things that have already been mentioned, are already in hand. The Assembly. Well, why not build on the virtues of the council and embrace them? I mean, if they are already being undertaken. RE1, if it's already doing these things, great. I mean, but why not build on it? Conservation of the fleet, great. I mean, all these things, I don't see those as being a reasons to vote against that amendment. And to apply, to give a kind of scientific authenticity to the Assembly is worrying. I mean, that will count a lot of opinion, but to give them a sort of scientific legacy, legitimacy is worrying. It isn't necessarily being construed as a body of scientists. And so I fear that this we're not, in a way, we're not almost playing to our strengths, where we could be taking action much more quickly, building on what we're doing. And I don't see why we need to wait so long. Thank you very much.
Councillor Chapman.
I wasn't intending to speak in this discussion, but having heard the opposition's comments, the line about taking so long, this is not a fair line. If you read the amendment, there are very specific dates for delivery of actions and plans to ensure that this city makes substantial progress towards a zero carbon economy across the city as a whole and in its operations. And I find it really quite offensive that you impugn the integrity of this side of the House on this issue, because we have been committed, massively committed to this agenda, committed to zero emissions, one of the very first cities in this country to do so, to electrify our vehicles, to tackle buses, to take polluting forms of transport out of the city centre. How many more examples do I have to give the other side of the House? So there is real integrity and passion on this side of the House for this issue. And I think you are dancing around the head of a pin in trying to push us to come up with solutions to problems which take time and analysis. And as Alex said earlier on, we need to do the analysis, we do the thought, and we'll come back with specific costed plans which lay out the trade-offs that a city like Oxford has to make in order to come to the right conclusions. And just on the point of ODS, which is I am partly responsible for, we are passionately committed to ODS, to cutting the emissions of the operation, to introducing electric vehicles, and also to looking at the plethora of bases that we operate, which are in largely 1960s buildings which are not fit for purpose. That's a very specific example of something that we want to do to tackle this. And finally, we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't on the Citizens' Assembly. If we had not set the Citizens' Assembly, you'd be the first to say to us, this is not an inclusive process. You're not counting opinion. You're not taking account of all the various parties. So we're doing that in a thoroughly, well-researched and constructive way. And I really do think you need to give us more credit for the hard work and success of our policies. Thank you very much.
Councillor Henwood.
Thank you, Chair. I think this Green motion is an excellent one. I'm sorry, I'm going to vote for this. With the Labour amendment that reads towards the vision of a zero carbon by 2020 at the latest. For me, I'm sorry, I cannot share that vision. There has to be a commitment, a value added to this that we can sign up to and commit this City Council to achieve by an end date. And I therefore think this is a reasonable target to set, that we should be achieving this by 2030. I'm committed to it. I want this council to be committed to it. Our party are committed to it. We want this.
Councillor Gant.
Thank you. I'll be very brief, Lord Mayor. First of all, nobody on this side has impugned the integrity of anybody on the other side. Secondly, I would just like to point out to Labour members that if they pass this amendment, they have said that Council will undertake to discourage the submission of motions. The motions that the Constitution allows this group to put forward are submitted to our group meetings and selected by a democratic vote. How do you propose to encourage or discourage what comes to that process? Just think about that before you vote, please.
We now move to the secondary amendment and then the proposal to sum up. So, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Unlike Mike, I'm absolutely hopeless at remembering quotes, so I cannot now remember who it was that I was reading recently who was talking about hot and cold politics. But I think it's a really useful analogy, and I think we see good examples of both of those things in this chamber. So in this definition, hot politics is the campaigning that gets things going and gets people changing their points of view. And then the cold politics is the kind of politics that Councillor Hollingsworth was talking about, which is the getting things done and actually sort of seeking to make the changes that people have been campaigning for. And I think it's important to remember that in this chamber, we mainly do cold politics. It may have been hot politics that got us into this chamber in the first place, because many of us came to politics because we passionately believe in various different issues, and we campaigned in hot politics in order to get here. And many of us continue to campaign in hot politics as well. But the business of this chamber is the cold politics of getting things done. So I'm not going to talk about the urgency of action on climate change, because I think there's an absolutely shared agenda in this chamber between all of us, everybody sitting around in this chamber and everyone in the public gallery, that is what we need to do. It's how we get there that we're debating today. And I think that we have a long way to go, I have to say, in persuading people outside this chamber that that's where we need to get to. I also, like Councillor Hollingsworth, get regular correspondence from people asking for more parking, asking for more access for private cars in the city, and being resistant, frankly, to the changes that we have already made in this city, let alone some of the more radical changes that we will have to need to propose in order to meet these targets. We also need to understand fully the choices that we are being asked to make here. I hear what Mike says about our existing housing stock, and that is exactly my point. We do need to be clear
that choosing to spend money on improving our existing housing stock is money that we will not be spending on desperately needed new housing. And we need proper information to understand these choices and to work out exactly where it is we're going to land on that particular choice. Because it is a choice, and we will need to seek a balance somewhere which says exactly by what date and how much we're going to make those decisions. So I said earlier that this council had made political decisions to keep services in-house. One easy way to reduce the council's obligations in order to meet targets would be simply to sell off those services so they were no longer part of our targets. That's not going to help anybody, and that is not any suggestion, I think, that would get any support from anybody in this chamber. But it is a logical conclusion to setting targets without having a plan to how to get there. At the last council meeting, we agreed to set up a citizens' assembly, and we need to let them do their work. Our amendment clearly states a vision for the City Council of zero carbon by 2030, but we do need a sensible plan of how to get there. Thank you.
Councillor Hayes, you now sum up the amendment.
I started a list, and I'm actually going to finish it because I think it's really crucial that the opposition do listen to this. This is not a council without ambition. Zero emission zone from 2020, zero emission black house by 2025, first on our road already. Support for the first 10 adopters of zero emission cabs, saving each driver 3,000. ODS servicing black cab. 3 bus companies running fleet house in the city centre from 2020. 78 buses upgraded fuel to low emission. 37 to run the cleanest form of combustion engine. 5 to be fully electric at first on our roads next month. A drop in harmful polluted air by an average of 23% in the last year. 100 charging stations on the street provided for in plans, so we don't have a gap between the haves who can afford those driveways so they can charge their cars and the have-nots who can't. 19 electric charging points for the exclusive use of black cabs. 2 electric light bus vehicles, 3 cargo bikes, and 3 electric vehicle charging points for the use of covered market traders. 20 pop-up on-street charging points. A charter for cleaner air, the first of its kind launched by a council with Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth signed by many councils, which Jeremy Corbyn stood up and lauded as an innovation of local government. And what I'm reliably told is a BBB, a big bloody battery. From 2020, which is charging hundreds of EVs at the same time, 100 ultra-rapid and fast charging stations, money-saving ground source heat pumps in around 300 buildings, try before you buy a scheme for black cab drivers, and then Project Leo, a £40 million investment kick-starting a renewable energy revolution. That's the last year. 1 year. We are a high ambition council. When we say that we're setting 2030 as the deadline, that is the absolute deadline. But we cannot embark on plans and policies without thinking them through. Because when you do that, you rush through policy, you make bad decisions, and you hurt the poorest in our community. And if we did that, quite rightly, every single one of you in the opposition benches would have a top of us. It's great to be in opposition. It's great to be able to come up with protests and campaigns. But the hard work of doing stuff is what matters. So what I'll say to you is this, and I hope I've got it to hand, so I threw it down. This went out across East Oxford. It's a green newsletter which talks about how the City Council apparently is opposed to climate change measures. And I just pointed out that that's rubbish. Come on inside. Develop policy, make changes. Let's work together, let's do it on a cross-party basis. Let's stop putting motions through for party disadvantage. Let's actually get things done. And that is the whole point about the final part of the amendment. And the very final thing I'll say is, I would love a standing panel akin to finance and housing and scrutiny. But I'm part of the administration. I'm not going to tell scrutiny what to do. What you want to do, you should do. So do it.
Vote. No. What is your point of order?
Scrutiny is not party political.
I think we know that. No. Right, we're moving to the vote, please. On the amendment, can I see all those in favour of the amendment as proposed by Councillor Hayes? Thank you. And those against? The amendment is carried. Any abstentions? No, not seeing any. So we now move on to the amended motion, and we have a debate on the amended motion. Does anyone wish to speak? Okay. In that case, we need the seconder of the motion, if you didn't speak before, Councillor Simmons.
Well, I'm a bit uncertain what to do, and I think we'll probably support it on the basis it's got the word 2030 in there, but it's a work towards a vision of zero carbon by 2030 rather than a clear pledge for a 2030 target. And I think that's really unfortunate it's been watered down. It attempts to stifle debate on climate change, and I can tell you we'll frankly ignore that. It's misrepresentation of what was in the Green Party leaflet, because if you read it, it very clearly says that all parties supported the climate emergency. It said unanimously, it very clearly reflected that. And also it didn't say the council wasn't doing anything on climate change. It actually said the council refused the Green Budget Amendment, which had 5, 6, 7 million pounds, can't remember the exact figure, which actually could have been diverted to address a climate emergency, which wasn't. And we talk about hot and cold politics. I'm in the Hollingsworth camp rather than the Howlett camp, although I'd very much like to be in the Howlett camp. So I do the cold politics. I was chair of finance for 2 years. You know, I know how these things get done. I know the challenges, and I'm not, daunted by it. And I know that there was millions of pounds in the council budget that could have been diverted to things which reduce carbon emissions, which end up being spent on things like park and ride, which increase emissions. The zero emission zone is all very good, but it's about the city centre and improving air quality in the city centre. Its overall ripple effect could well be to increase carbon emissions beyond the city centre. So I'm really about a pragmatist. It's really about what can be done. It's a great shame that the ambition isn't what it could have been. We could have had a very clear pledge to make just the city council carbon neutral by 2030. That's what the Labour did on the county, but they don't seem to be willing to do it here. We could have had a very clear statement of 2030 targets more broadly. We've got, again, a bit more wishy-washy, blaming the government for not giving us the powers and resources to do it, which it's fine to ask for more, and we did that in the original motion, but separate from setting the target. Let's make the pledge and then ask for the resources to deliver it, rather than refuse to make the pledge unless we get the resources, because there is an enormous amount we can do locally. And if you look at the Committee on Climate Change, their 4 sort of low-hanging fruits, things they say can be done, are all things that can be done at a local level, all things that we can influence, and we are influencing, we just need to do more. If you look, and things like, the government's not helping by not decarbonising the grid, that's just simply untrue. Like 30% reductions in carbon emissions that we as a council enjoy are because the government's decarbonised the grid.
Onshore wind.
Onshore wind, yeah, fine, do onshore wind. It's great. Any form of renewable energy that the government is actually doing. So to actually blame it onto government when actually most of the reductions that we've achieved as a council, all councils have achieved, have been because of decarbonisation of the grid. So it's just false to say that we've done all these. So it's a great shame, but we're going to support it because it's got 2030 in there.
You stand up, Councillor Wolfe.
Thank you, yes. Well, Lord Mayor, we're faced with something which is actually, frankly, a bit garbled and not nearly as clear as the original motion. It's got strange things in there about citizens' assembly, which we have yet to really hear a lot about, and we've had an answer to a question which the leader has helpfully provided about exactly how this thing is going to work and what its remit is going to be. I hope we will be included in this, but apparently it's going to make recommendations around target deadlines. That sounds pretty significant to me, and it's going to establish the facts. Gosh. So, that's what, according to your own script, that's what this is going to do. Nobody has suggested that we're suggesting rushing ahead and not thinking things through. This council has proceeded very carefully and deliberately for a long time, thinking things through very carefully. My question about the work of the environmental sustainability team was about celebrating all the wonderful things that are going on. So I think it's really unhelpful to suggest that because we're in opposition we don't know how to run things or don't have any responsible. I feel a shared responsibility for what this council does. It's not something I'm here to carp against, it's something I'm here that I want to support and celebrate, and not impugning anybody's integrity here. We want, and I'm very heartened by what's come back from the benches, because Labour benches, because people have obviously been a bit stung by our opposition to this very inadequate amendment, and I'm very heartened that you've been stung by it, because it suggests to me that you are actually wanting to do these things, which is terrific, you know. I will vote for it with a heavy heart. We will not be intimidated into not bringing motions if we feel that they are helpful to help us on this journey. Frankly, the monitoring officer has not got the power to stop us doing that, so why you put it in, I have no idea. But anyway, it's a shame we've lost some of the stuff, but there's 2030 in it, so let's all support it.
Thank you. We now move to the vote. Can I see all those in favour of the motion as amended, please show. Those against? And those abstaining? Lovely, thank you. That motion is passed. We have about 15 minutes left to do the rest of the motions, so we will move on to council tax. Councillor Zad, do you have a seconder? Can I know who they are, please? Thank you. Councillor Zad, over to you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I am on adoption, fostering and care panel at Oxfordshire County Council. This motion was passed anonymously at County Council across Oxfordshire to exempt caregivers from council tax at the age of 16 and 25. The Children's Society last year found young people aged 16 or over who have left the care and began the difficult transition out of care and move into independent accommodation, begins to manage their own budget fully for first time, and find these extremely challenging and with no family support. They fall into debt and financial difficulties. We make sure the transition from care to adult life is as smooth as possible and that they don't fall into debts. Council tax is another financial problem for them. The Centre for Social Justice found that 57% of young people find it difficult managing their money and avoiding debts when leaving care. This is further reinforced by research from Joseph Rowntree Foundation. The caregivers had threats to their tenancies and council tax, and they received bailiff's letter, which is a very frightening experience for them. The council therefore resolved to exempt council tax and work with Oxfordshire County Council and other district councils. And thank you for listening. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Azad, there is an amendment in the name of Councillor Henwood. Do you wish to accept that amendment?
No, because that amendment is not relevant to my motion.
Okay. Councillor Henwood, do you wish to continue with that amendment?
I do, Lord Mayor.
Yes. You do. Thank you. Councillor Ligo, do you wish to speak now as the seconder or reserve? Okay. In that case, Councillor Henwood, do you have a seconder for your motion?
Councillor Wade will second that.
Thank you. Councillor Henwood, would you like to propose your amendment?
Thank you. My amendment is to make a small contribution to this, as I feel it's an excellent motion. I would like, however, to include young carers into this. According to the Children's Society, there are an estimated 700,000 young carers in the UK. Kids or teens who are in primary care for sick, incapacitated or addicted parents. That means 2 young carers in every classroom, each typically spending between 20 and 50 hours a week on their caring duties, and these numbers are rising. The young carer may be providing care for a physically disabled parent or sibling, including things as arthritis, cancer or epilepsy, a mental illness, for example, depression, borderline personality disorder or bipolar, a learning disability, this includes Asperger's, autism and ADHD. Substance abuse, for example, could include alcohol, drugs, including prescription drugs. Young carers miss an average of 48 days of school because of their role, and 68% have been bullied at some point directly because of having a care for someone. Organisations set up to help young carers recognise all of these problems and have people and strategies which will support them. 57% of young carers are likely to drop out of university should they enter university. Due to a combination of missed lessons at secondary and the impact on attainment can be profound and employment prospects can suffer. For this reason, I hope you will accept my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wade, do you wish to speak now, or? Thank you.
The Liberal Democrats give their support unequivocally to this amendment. Young people and also registered carers provide huge, often unsung support to their relatives, older and younger. In February, I met a young woman who, from the age of 4, had been the main provider of care for her disabled twin sister. When at the age of 11 she was taken into foster care herself, she said how difficult it was to find herself treated as a child, when throughout her childhood she had been the adult. These carer children are extraordinary, and we should express our commitment to supporting them, both during their childhood and when they reach 18 and are perhaps able to move into their own accommodation. It's a very important new report produced by Healthwatch Oxfordshire and Be Free Young Carers, which is a wonderful charity for young carers operating in South Oxfordshire and the Vale, but sadly not yet in Oxford City. This report estimates that there are 2,000 young carers in the city, but none of the 8 schools involved, including Cheney, whom we heard from earlier, could identify any specialist community-based support for young carers in the city. We should make this the year when Be Free Young Carers is funded by the city to extend its vital work into Oxford. I commend this report to you, and of course I commend the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Lord Mayor, so mine was on both, well, I can speak on the amendments or on the main motion. I don't know if Jamila wants to accept the amendments or not.
Right, so just to make clear, we are now speaking on the amendment. Sorry, am I hearing that the amendment is accepted?
I'm so sorry. I had emailed to say that Councillor David Henwood drawn his amendment and it wasn't shown to me, so I will accept his amendments.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, and thanks very much, Lord Mayor. So I think it's just worth thinking about the background to this, which is that now in the vast majority of local authorities, no matter what your income is, some council tax is charged. And the background was, of course, the decision of the coalition government to localise decisions on council tax support for people who are of working age. And the vast majority of councils have done that and have decided to reduce entitlements. And so, quite properly, the Children's Commissioner has got a campaign going to say that care leavers shouldn't have to pay. I think that's right. David Henwood, I think, is equally right to point to the position of young carers. I could carry on listing examples that I think are equally worthy of exemption, will include those who are so disabled they cannot work and can't pay the council tax in other ways. It will concern adult carers who are have full-time caring commitments. And to be completely honest, I think I support the campaign, I support the motion, because clearly I want to see those groups help, but actually this is all repairing a broken system, and the broken system is one where the welfare state has been rendered unable, or local authorities financially unable, maybe unwilling, to provide the level of support that this council does and waive the council tax entitlement for those who are on low incomes. This is actually, it affects a significant number of people. The total caseload in Oxford is comfortably above 10% of the households in our city. The profile is relatively low. I'm sorry to see that the public galleries are emptied out for this discussion, which I think is interesting. I think until you reverse that decision to say that local authorities can go and can make reductions to groups that are relatively invisible, that will often not assert their own cases. And this is, to be honest, this campaign has come from the Children's Commission, I think, rather than necessarily being a grassroots thing. Often things people don't feel comfortable talking about very directly to politicians when they're in quite a difficult, vulnerable situation. Not an issue that comes up very often for me on the doorstep. Until the government repairs that welfare state, goes back to a national entitlement, and I think we're going to continue having a broken system. What we can do is maintain our entitlements locally. We've had hard financial choices to make in order to do that, but so far every year we have maintained our national system of council tax support. So I think we should give our support to other local authorities looking to do this and looking to make their local systems better. I also think that we should campaign. I don't know if it's going to be very useful for us doing this as city councillors, but maybe we can do it as members of our political parties to say that actually localising decisions on welfare support for relatively marginal groups, marginalised groups, in a situation where local authorities are then financially rewarded for making cutbacks is a bad way to run a welfare state. It's a bad decision, it shouldn't happen, and it should be reversed.
Craig, then Sean.
Yeah, thank you, Ed, because I think you said a lot of the things I was thinking but hadn't actually vocalised them as well as you did, because I think it was something niggling me about this motion, because I totally support it, and I support the amendment. It's actually because I wish I'd previously noted it and put an extra amendment in to say right to the ministers and right to MPs, because I think that's really should be the target from everything you've said, and actually trying to change other district councils who know very well what they're doing with changes in the council tax reduction scheme locally. You know, we would be quite upset if another council wrote to us and told us what to do. And I think they'll probably be quite upset, not because they're doing it out of ignorance, they're doing it because they know what they're doing and they've made different political priorities to what we've made as a council. Fine writing to them, I don't think have much effect. Fine writing to the county, I don't think have much effect. It's just maybe we can add it as a last amendment, or maybe Councillor herself will do it anyway, is to actually write to the ministers and MPs, because I think they're the ones who have the most influence over this.
Yeah. We have 2 minutes left. I would propose that we restrict the debate on this to the people who have indicated so far, who are Sean, Mike, Susan, and to sum up, Councillor Zad, unless Mark. We'll add Mark into that as you've seconded it, and try and reduce the length of time. Is Council content with that proposal? I'm going to take a vote. Councillor Wade, I'm afraid you've already spoken, so you don't get a second bite. Sean.
Okay, I'll talk first. I just really wanted to thank Jamila for highlighting this gap, and obviously David for raising the issue of young carers. The sort of sense of all of our young people deserve the best possible start in life. And reflecting on my own experience of a couple of people who are now in their 30s and their transition to adulthood, you know, there is a learning curve, particularly with regards to learning to manage fiscal matters and to run a household. And I would call on everybody in this chamber to support this excellent motion, just to give some of our really very vulnerable young people the support we can. So thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As briefly as I can, the original motion says how we can do more to ensure that care leavers have the best possible start when it says at their own homes. Of course, young carers are in a slightly different situation. They're not trying to set at their own homes, but maintain themselves in the existing ones. I'd just like to reassure members that both our welfare support teams and our team who administer disabled facilities grants and officers have done lots of work on those, are well aware of the issues surrounding carers, including young carers, and I'll continue to make sure they are. Also, because the county has mentioned, colleagues may be aware, the County Council has appointed a new director responsible for housing-related issues, which I think is a great step forward for the county. I intend to be meeting with her soon, and young carers is an issue I'll be happy to raise with her, how to support them through the council's.
Susan?
Thank you. It was really to pick up on Craig's point, which is that I'm more than happy to undertake to write to MPs and ask them to lobby on this issue. And that I think the point in relation to working with other district councils was not for us to kind of send them some kind of letters like going, you ought to be more like us, because I don't think that would be very helpful. But to be working with them in a more friendly atmosphere, where we have been sort of talking about this issue more generally in meetings of leaders about how we can work together to support care leavers, and I think there are a number of fora in which we can offer to share practice, and bear in mind that other councils have decided that they will move to putting in some support for care leavers. I think what I would be gently wishing to suggest to people is that they might wish to think a bit more broadly about the support that they give people in terms of council tax reduction, because whilst it's important that care leavers get it, it's also important that other groups who are discriminated against and who don't have the money to pay for it are also supported.
Thank you. Councillor Ligo?
Just quickly, thank you, Jamila and David. I have two, one of the corporate parents, corporate parenting panel at County as well, and one of the things we agreed, which I proposed to put forward in one of the restructures, is that we have the young people who sit on the corporate panel to sit throughout the meeting in the private and confidential parts as well. And I think what we will do is, next time we meet up with them as well, is to ask them to write a letter to ministers as well, is what we're trying to do as well. Because speaking to them in the last meeting, one of the things they did point out was we must make council tax fairer for all. So it would be nice if the young people of the panel led on that with help from us as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Azad, would you like to sum up?
Thank you very much. I would like to apologise to David Henwood because I thought his motion was withdrawn, but I really sympathise with young carers who have to have a difficult life going through caring for a disabled person. And I'd like to thank you all councillors who have supported this motion, and I do think that we need to work on it and take it to Parliament to exempt council tax. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now need to vote on this. Can I see all those in favour of the motion as amended? Please show. I think. Okay, unless there are any abstentions or votes against. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. I close the meeting.